Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Trump speaks to Zelensky on the phone as the US president says they are very much on track. It comes as Russia and Ukraine trade air attacks as Putin rejects America's proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. Israel launched a new limited ground invasion in Gaza as hundreds protest on the streets of Jerusalem. And a Louisiana inmate is executed with nitrogen gas despite calls from his attorneys of it being an unconstitutional method. To our top story, and President Trump has spoken to President Zelensky on the phone earlier today. Posting on Truth Social, the US president said the conversation lasted around an hour and centered around his call with President Putin last night. Trump added that things were very much on track. It comes after Russia and Ukraine launched multiple air attacks on one another after Vladimir Putin rejected a proposal from the US regarding a 30-day ceasefire. Ahead of further talks in Saudi Arabia this weekend, the two leaders agreed on a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine. Sarah Firth reports.
Not the sound of success, but the familiar overnight air raid sirens ringing out over Ukraine's capital as explosions lit up the night sky. It comes on the back of a phone call between US President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, where an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure for 30 days was agreed. The US president calling the exchange a good and productive one. The Kremlin claiming in their post-phone call statement that Putin immediately gave the Russian military the appropriate order. Ukraine's President Zelensky responding to the call saying Ukraine supports all steps aimed at ending the war.
We are skeptical when it comes to trusting the Russians. There is no trust in Putin. That's why I'm saying we need to understand how it will work technically so that it will not depend on their will alone. That is it.
Many Ukrainians expressing the same skepticism as their president.
I think this will be a step forward to a ceasefire if Russia really stops attacking Ukrainian infrastructure. But to be honest, I hardly believe it will be long-lasting.
For better or worse, Trump and Putin have a history, one that Trump has repeatedly claimed means he is the leader capable of getting a ceasefire deal done. The White House are already claiming the call as a step in the right direction. But with footage released by the Emergency Service of Ukraine appearing to show an attack on a hospital in Sumy overnight, and Ukraine's Zelensky claiming Russian attacks specifically targeted civilian infrastructure and started within hours of the Trump-Putin agreement, it'll be not words on paper, but actions on the ground that count. Sarah Firth, Al Arabiya News, Washington, D.C.
We can now go live to Moscow to speak to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, let's return to that phone call between Trump and Zelensky a day after his call with Vladimir Putin, of course. Is that a sign that things are now moving forward?
Absolutely, and that has been the understanding in Moscow as well, because it follows the conversation with the Russian president. Now, we've heard from Donald Trump, President of the United States, that much of that discussion was based on what the American president discussed with the Russian counterpart the day before, and that was an attempt to align the positions of the Ukrainian and Russian side in terms of their needs and their requests. That's according to a post post that Donald Trump posted on his social media platform Truth Social. So in this conversation, definitely Moscow would have been looking for the Ukrainian side for some signals that it would also be listening to the appeal, to the call coming from Moscow to prevent and to halt attacks against the energy infrastructure for the next 30 days.
Dasha, Putin agreed to a pause in targeting energy infrastructures in Ukraine, but the Kremlin denies striking energy infrastructure and is accusing Ukraine. What more can you tell us about what's happening?
That's precisely the accusation from the Russian side. Moscow says it was Kyiv that was not adhering to that principle and saying that there was a deliberate overnight attack by the Ukrainian side against Russian energy facilities. That is particular Kavkazskaya station in Russia's Krasnodar region in the southwest of the country. Meanwhile, what Moscow is saying is that this attack by the Ukrainian side runs counter the efforts that have been put forward by the Russian and American presidents. Meanwhile, Moscow insists that following the conversation between Trump and Putin the day before, the Russian Ministry of Defense has received orders to halt those attacks, and they say that there were drones already in the air that were supposed to target energy facilities of Ukraine in the area of Nikolaev region. But those drones were destroyed by the Russian air defenses in order to make sure that Moscow adheres to this very idea of halting the strikes against energy infrastructure. So definitely this is something that Moscow is closely monitoring, and the perception in Moscow is that if Ukraine manages to align with this, then certainly things will be moving forward much faster.
Further talks are due to take place in Saudi Arabia this weekend. What are we expecting to come out of these discussions?
Well, indeed, the Kremlin has confirmed that in the coming days, the dates for the meetings between Russian and American experts will be defined, and the Americans said that that will be Sunday. So the two presidents, in their second conversation on the phone, they have agreed to start those talks immediately. So now we are expecting the groups of experts from Russia and the United States to start working on the nuances of the peace settlement for Ukraine. The understanding in Moscow is that's going to be a very difficult road ahead, because there are many bridges that have to be built, there are many differences that have to be merged, and those groups will be working on the nuances, first of all, of the ceasefire that Donald Trump has proposed. The Russian president raised many questions about, including policing, control, verification, and many other issues. So those groups will be tasked with the nitty-gritty of how that could be materializing. But also the understanding in Moscow is that those groups will also need to address the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine, and that is obviously for Russia a big red line. Any possible participation of the Ukrainian authorities in any sort of military alliances, and Moscow will be insisting that there have to be some guarantees from all sides to make sure that Russia's national interests are preserved. So this is exactly these kind of negotiations that Moscow is expecting to take place next.
Dasha, Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you for joining me. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Tensions have escalated between the Trump administration and judges in the US. Chief Justice John Roberts has rejected impeachment calls for judges shortly after President Trump demanded the removal of one who ruled against his deportation plans. In another seeming impasse, a federal judge has blocked the US military from enforcing the president's executive order banning transgender people from military service. The US has launched multiple airstrikes in Yemen, targeting the Houthis. The group has been threatening to attack ships on the Red Sea shipping route after Israel's latest restrictions on Gaza. That's despite US pressure on the Houthis to scale back the attacks. The mayor of Istanbul has been detained as part of a corruption probe days before being named as a presidential candidate. Erkam İmamoğlu from the secular Republican People's Party is among Turkish President Erdogan's strongest political rivals. Authorities have detained 100 suspects as part of the investigation and accuse İmamoğlu of being the leader of a criminal organization. And finally, the world's ugliest fish has now earned the title of Fish of the Year over in New Zealand. The blobfish was crowned by an environmental group. It won the award with nearly 1,300 votes out of 5,500 votes cast. There have been anti-government protests on the streets of Jerusalem today as thousands of demonstrators clashed with police, attempting to break down barricades outside the home of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They are against the government's plans to fire intelligence chief Ronan Bar and are calling for a hostage deal despite a return to fighting in Gaza. In the last hour, Israel has launched a new limited ground invasion to retake a key corridor in Gaza. According to Gaza's civil defense agency, 13 people were killed in Israeli strikes on the Strip. The health ministry said a strike on a UN building in Deir al-Balah killed one foreign worker and injured 5 others. Israel, however, denied targeting the compound. We can now speak to the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and Foreign Ministry Special Envoy, Fleur Hassan Nahum. Fleur, thank you for joining me. Israel has launched new limited ground invasions of Gaza amid deadly bombing, with Gaza's civil defense saying at least 436 people have been killed since Israel resumed strikes. Is this still a case of self-defense for Israel?
Well, let's be accurate here. Gaza civil defense is a very nice euphemism for Hamas terrorists, for jihadi extremists. And so you can't trust anything they say. We've caught, and the whole world has caught them in lies about how many injured and how many dead. And so I think we have to be very careful before we say those numbers and those facts as fact.
I just wanted to bring up something else, Fleur. Gaza's health ministry toll actually shows 970 deaths in the past 2 days. So do you think that these numbers are inaccurate?
Absolutely. We know that from last year's Al-Shifa hospital debacle, where in fact it was a Hamas rocket that landed in its own hospital on its way to be in Israel. And when it was reported to be an Israeli attack, missile attack, there were 500 dead. The minute that it became a Hamas own goal, own missile on its own hospital, the dead were 23. So really you can't trust anything coming out from a group of terrorists that are ruling and subjugating its own people and ruling the Gaza Strip.
The UN is also reporting a UN aid worker has been killed in Gaza and 4 others have been seriously injured. I just want to ask you the question again. Is it still a case of self-defense for Israel?
Well, as long as the hostages are there, absolutely. All they have to do is return the hostages. There's 25 hostages alive. The rest we believe are dead. It's almost 60 hostages. And we know that they've been starved. They've been treated very badly. They've been tortured. We know how they came back. You've seen it yourselves on the screens. And so if they want all this to be over, it's very simple. Hand over the hostages. That's all it is.
Let's just touch on that. So families of hostages in Gaza are said to be terrified they won't return after Israel resumed fighting. Has Israel actually given up on bringing their hostages home?
No, absolutely not. What we have learned over the torturous last year and a half in a war we didn't start, in a war we didn't want, Let's remember that Gaza has been under Hamas rule since 2007. They could have turned it into Dubai, they could have turned it into Singapore, and instead they turned it into a proxy of their Iranian regime and used it as a place to launch attacks on Israel. And so this is absolutely what we want, is our hostages home. This is a war we didn't want. And it's a war that, it turns out, the leadership of Gaza, Hamas, don't really care much about their people, because if they did, they'd be negotiating in good faith to help us get our hostages home. And this is what it's about at the moment.
Hamas remains a dominant force in Gaza. There have been previous efforts from both sides to agree on a path to peace. Do you think this can still be achieved from where we are right now?
Yes, I mean, look, ultimately, the military pressure got Hamas the last two times, to sit down and negotiate. And this is what Israel's doing right now. It is only the military pressure. Otherwise, what they're doing with their time in ceasefire is beefing up their terrorist infrastructure to continue attacking Israel. No normal country would put up with this. No normal country would just allow the people who have declared in their charter that their sole aim is to actually destroy the whole country and all the Jews around the world. And so at the moment, the military pressure will create the situation where they will sit down and hopefully negotiate a deal. Even Stephen Witkoff, who is President Trump's envoy here for this situation, has said that the last offer that Hamas offered or wanted or willing to accept was a joke. It was 4 dead people and one live boy for 50 or 100 terrorists in our jails. This is not a serious offer where we have another 25 living hostages, and time is ticking for those hostages, because we know how they've come out. We know that they've all been through a personal Holocaust. We know they're not getting fed, they're being starved, and they've been tortured. And so the time is running out, and Israel can't sit around and wait for Hamas to play games and release in drib drabs every week 2 or 3 and 1 dead and 2 dead, and then lie about the dead that they're releasing. Enough is enough.
There's been suspicions that Benjamin Netanyahu never had any intention of agreeing to a second phase of the ceasefire deal, as it would involve pulling Israeli troops out of Gaza, whilst Hamas does, of course, remain. What do you make of this theory?
I don't think it's real, because we actually brought troops out of Gaza in order to have that deal. So the second phase just extends that. Why wouldn't Benjamin Netanyahu want to bring all his hostages home for extending the ceasefire? And also, as long as we extend the ceasefire, we have a chance of thinking about the future of Gaza and bringing in partners like the Saudis, like the Emiratis, like good faith actors like the Americans. This is only possible if Hamas don't continue to rule Gaza. And that's much better for the surrounding countries, and it's also much better for the people of Gaza.
Fleur Hassan Nahum, the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and Foreign Ministry Special Envoy, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you.
Let's hear from the other side and speak to Dr. Jamal Nazal, a spokesperson for Fatah. Good evening to you, Dr. Jamal. The United Nations says there is intolerable suffering in Gaza amid deadly airstrikes and a continued aid blockade. Can you tell us more?
Well, the United Nations are right, but they have failed to prevent a genocide. What Israel is doing, it's sleepwalking into a human disaster. It is causing a human disaster and of an unprecedented proportions. What Israel is doing now is so dangerous. The world has seen nothing like this since World War II, and it is awful. The people lack the basic necessities of daily life. There is no electricity, hardly any water to drink. There is shortage of food. Israel has destroyed all schools, all universities, almost all mosques, all hospitals, and all UN premises. So what are we talking about here? The world must cause Israel to respect the rules of conflict, to respect the necessity, the principle of military necessity, to respect the principle of proportionality. Israel has to provide evidence when it says it is targeting terrorists. Israel has to respect the human sanctity of life, which Israel is violating. I heard what the Israeli spokesman has said. It's really silly. She said all it takes to end the war is for Hamas to release the hostages. Well, look at what Israel is doing in the West Bank, destroying almost everything. There are no hostages in the West Bank. Look at what Israel is doing in Syria. Are there Israeli hostages in Syria to justify what Israel is doing there, bombing everything that moves in Syria? So we have a government in Israel which has a criminal mindset. They would never accept peace. They do not want peace because they are afraid of peace. Peace makes them fear that the Israeli society will break down from within. That's why this Israeli government needs conflicts and more conflicts. That is why Israel resumed attacking Gaza, because they don't want a solution to this crisis.
So earlier, as you just mentioned, I was speaking to Fleur Hassan Nahum, and she said right now this is a war that they didn't want, and they are pressuring Hamas with the latest strikes to get their hostages back. So my big question to you right now is, do you think that Israel and Hamas can go back to the negotiation table? And do you think there's any way out of this? Because what you said to me is Israel doesn't want peace.
Well, contrary to what she said, this is a war that Israel designed. Reports have proven that Israel's government was informed about the 7th of October, about the attack of October 7th, before it took place. It turned a blind eye to the warnings of the Israeli institutions, and it allowed it to happen. By the way, as a Fatah spokesman, we disapprove of October 7th. We disapprove of targeting civilians, be it on the hands of Hamas or in Israel. Yes, there is a way to end this. Hamas should have listened to the Arab Initiative. Hamas should have adhered to the decisions of the Arab Summit that took place in Cairo. The Arab states provided an alternative plan to Mr. Trump's plan of driving everybody out of Gaza. Hamas should have listened to what the Arab states have said. But that doesn't justify what Israel is doing. Because on the first day of resuming fire in Gaza, Israel killed 400 people. And the number is proven, not only by Hamas. Hamas is not the source we rely on. International institutions did provide the proof of the numbers, that the numbers of the casualties is true. And if Israel has doubts that the numbers are not accurate, it should allow international observers and journalists to enter Gaza to see by themselves what is taking place. There is an end to this conflict. Israel should cease fire. The mediators should resume their efforts. We should be given more time to look for a solution. There is a solution. The Arab state provide for the right platform, the right plan, the right vision led by Saudi Arabia and Egypt. We can find a solution, but Israel doesn't want one. Israel wants a conflict.
And earlier, obviously, when I was speaking to Fleur Hassan Nahum, she said that those death toll figures are not accurate, but you say that they are. So thank you for your point of view there. Israel said the return to fighting was fully coordinated with Washington. Now, could this be a tactic to get Hamas to agree to America's plans to transform Gaza?
No, this is a tactic to destroy Gaza, to destroy people, to destroy everybody and everything in Gaza. They want to make Gaza uninhabitable for Palestinians, and they want to drive them out of Gaza. What Israel is doing is not pressuring Hamas. Killing Palestinians is not an instrument of pressure in the eyes of Hamas. Hamas doesn't care about the number of Palestinians killed. It doesn't care about anything except remaining in power. Israel understands this, and it knows this all too well. What Israel wants is destroying Gaza, destroying the West Bank. If you wish, we can talk a little bit about the West Bank and what Israel is doing. It is terrifying the people here, blackmailing them, doing all sorts of collective punishment to everybody, despite the fact that there is no Hamas in the West Bank. There are no hostages. So They use all of this as a pretext. This is the classical Zionist talking points to justify killing civilians. This is a war against a defenseless population, be it in Gaza or in the West Bank.
Dr. Jamal Nazal, spokesman for Fatah, thank you so much for joining me and bringing me your insights. Now let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A federal judge has blocked Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency from shutting down the U.S. Agency for International Development. U.S. District Judge Theodore Chang in Maryland said Musk's efforts to close the foreign aid agency violated the U.S. Constitution. Chang has ordered Musk to restore access to USAID's computer systems for employees, including those who were placed on leave. Canada and Europe could reconsider their interests in purchasing high-end U.S. weaponry as the Trump administration makes changes to U.S. foreign policy. President Trump has left NATO members questioning whether the U.S. would come to their aid if Europe was attacked by Russia. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth previously told his European counterparts the United States could not make Europe's security their primary focus. South Korea's industry minister will visit Washington this week. He'll meet top officials to discuss concerns over being placed on a watch list after the U.S. Department of Energy designated South Korea as a sensitive country. The acting U.S. ambassador in Seoul said that South Korea was added to the list because visitors to the Energy Department's labs mishandled some sensitive information. And NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams are doing great after landing back on Earth off the Florida coast yesterday. They spent more than 9 months in space after a mission that was only meant to last 8 days, and it suffered from technical issues. They've been checked over by a medical team before being reunited with their families. A Louisiana prisoner has been executed with nitrogen gas, the 5th person in the U.S. to be put to death using this very method. 46-year-old Jesse Hoffman Jr. had been found guilty of killing 28-year-old advertising executive Mary Molly Elliott in New Orleans. Hoffman was 18 at the time. Hoffman's lawyers had previously battled the Supreme Court, arguing nitrogen gas, which deprives a person of oxygen, violates the 8th Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. I'm now joined by human rights lawyer and founder of Justice League, Clive Stafford Smith. Clive, I really appreciate you joining me. Firstly, you actually knew Jesse Hoffman Jr. from your time in New Orleans. Tell us about his crimes and how he actually ended up in jail.
Yeah, well, I ran a charity in New Orleans for 11 years doing death penalty defense work, and he ended up in jail much like everyone in the U.S. does, which is that he had a very bad defense in a parish that was overwhelmingly white, and he was black. Look, there's no excusing the terrible thing he did. He killed a woman, but when you put it in perspective, he was 18 years old at the time. He came from an incredibly abusive background, and he just didn't get much of a defense. And then he spent 29 years waiting to be executed, by which time he was a very different human being.
As we mentioned, Hoffman's lawyers tried to argue against the use of nitrogen gas. Explain to us why this particular method was used over the lethal injection.
Well, that's a very good question. Lethal injection was offered back about 40 years ago as a kinder, gentler form of executing people. Turned out, and look, I've had to witness a couple of my clients being killed by it. It turns out it's just not true. The drugs that they used would take a terribly long time. So many of the people who were being injected had drug problems, and it was very, very hard to find a vein One time it took 40 minutes of them probing the guy with a needle to do it. So they had to come up with different ways. They ran out of those drugs in the end because drug companies didn't want their drugs being used to kill people. And they came up with this nitrogen suffocation, effectively. And it's a typical American story, which I say is an American, which is they copied a BBC television program by a guy called Michael Portillo, who was a British MP, who went around trying to figure out if there was a nice way of killing people and settled on this in a ridiculous television program. And that's why we now are trying this nitrogen hypoxia, which is basically just suffocating a human being in quite an unpleasant way.
Hoffman is not the only prisoner to be put to death this week. How many prisoners are currently awaiting execution on death row? And as you mentioned there, it does take a long time.
Well, it does. And in this 3-day period, there are 4 people who are going to be killed. There was Jesse Hoffman yesterday. Today, well, actually, it just should be happening very much this second in the US. Is the execution of Aaron Gunches, who's done 23 years on death row in Arizona. Tomorrow you've got Eddie James, who's done 30 years on Florida's death row, and tomorrow also Wendell Grissom, who's done 20 years on Oklahoma's death row. So there's a real spate of killing people going on in the US at the moment.
Clive, you have personally worked to overturn death sentences for convicts. You obviously spoke to us early about Jesse Hoffman Jr. My question to you is, do you really believe they can be reformed? And is the death penalty actually any deterrent?
Well, I mean, one of the things you have to take into account when you talk about reforming people is I'm in the middle of a process now to determine how many innocent people have been executed. And of the 1,615 to date, we're batting about a 13% average of getting the wrong person altogether. So we can't talk about reforming them if they didn't do it. And let's face it, one of the people I represented, Edward Earl Johnson, who was executed, I'm convinced was innocent. But then when you go beyond that, you look at Jesse Hoffman, he was 18 and he was a mixed up, abused kid when he was sent to death row. And he was in his 40s, almost 30 years later when we killed him. They're very, very different people, just not the same person. And deterrence is irrelevant. No one is deterred by the death penalty, least of all the 7 people who have held me up at gunpoint in New Orleans alone. That's just nonsense that politicians like Governor Landry spout to make up for the fact that they do nothing sensible to try and prevent the crime wave in the US.
Just whilst we have you, Clive, what's your take on the deportations currently taking place over in the US, the immigrants being taken to El Salvador? We've obviously seen the pictures of it happening, many of whom haven't actually been in front of a judge before they were put on these flights.
Well, I'm actually very sad about this as an American. I brought the very first case against Guantanamo Bay back in 2002. When we were hating Muslim people and saying everyone was terrorists. And, I finally got my last of 87 clients out of Guantanamo Bay in January when Trump starts using it for immigrants. And we're now vilifying immigrants as evil, horrendous terrorists. And this is just trampling on the American system in order to try again to spur hatred for a small group of people and pretend you're doing something when in fact all you're doing is sacrificing the essence of the country that we want to be. So it's very, very sad, but we are fighting to stop it, and I think we will.
Clive Stafford-Smith, human rights lawyer and founder of the Justice League, thank you for your insights this evening.
Sure.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Pfizer has raised about $3.3 billion through the sale of its remaining 7.3% stake in Haleon, the maker of Sensodyne toothpaste. The drug maker has sold its entire stake to institutional investors and the consumer healthcare firm at 385 pence per share. Under the deal, Haleon has agreed to buy back 44 million shares from Pfizer, which is currently its largest shareholder. Google has agreed to pay $28 million to settle a lawsuit that claimed white and Asian employees were given better pay and also career opportunities than workers from ethnic backgrounds. That's according to a law firm representing claimants. The tech giant confirmed it had reached a resolution but rejected the allegations made against it. Turning to sports news now. Former tennis world number one Naomi Osaka says she wants to play with the big dogs again after battling to a 3-set win in the first round of the Miami Open. Osaka came from a set down to beat Ukraine's Yulia Strabodetska and claim her first victory since the Australian Open's second round in January. And the CEO of Formula One, Stefano Domenicali, has held a meeting with the Prime Minister of Thailand to discuss plans for a street circuit Grand Prix in Bangkok. The Thai leader says the government would commission a feasibility study into the possibility of a race in the capital from 2028. There is an existing track in Buriram in northeast Thailand, which is accredited by the World Motorsport governing body. A reminder of our top stories. Trump speaks to Zelensky on the phone as the US president says they are very much on track. It comes as Russia and Ukraine trade air attacks as Putin rejects America's proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. Israel launched a new limited ground invasion in Gaza as hundreds protest on the streets of Jerusalem. And a Louisiana inmate is executed with nitrogen gas, despite calls from his attorneys of it being an unconstitutional method. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. My guest this week is a fierce warrior who's conquered the boxing world. Oleksandr Usyk is the WBC, WBO and WBA heavyweight champion. Last year, he saw off a challenge from the intimidating Tyson Fury twice, and now feels he has just a couple of fights left before he hangs up his gloves after an undefeated professional career. And as a proud Ukrainian, he's carried the sporting hopes of his nation during a time of conflict and chaos. As diplomatic moves have continued to find an end to the war with Russia, Oleksandr Usyk joined me for an exclusive interview and reflected on coping with the twin challenges of life both inside and outside the ring. Oleksandr, I'm glad you could give us some time. I know you're very busy. There's a lot going on in your life. Apart from being from a country currently at war with Russia, you're obviously at the absolute top of the boxing mountain. And even Tyson Fury couldn't knock you off twice in less than a year. Now, the WBO has ordered you to begin negotiations with Joseph Parker for a mandatory title defense. What's your response to that?
Yes, our army continues to defend our country, and our guys are fighting for our freedom from the enemy. And I'm grateful to them for that. And I feel that it's impossible to express the gratitude that we all have for what our guys are doing. This is first. And secondly, WBO told us that I should defend this title. But now our aim, the goal of our team, is to unite our belts with Daniel Dubois.
With the possibility of Anthony Joshua getting a shot at Daniel Dubois' world title, how do you think he would do in a potential fight against Dubois, especially after him being away from the ring for a while?
There's always a chance. In the first fight, Daniel was a winner. But it's sport, boxing. If there is another fight, I'm not a great predictor. It will be interesting to see another fight between Joshua and Dubois, a revenge match.
Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois.
Well, Oleksandr, it's reported that your team is keen rather that you fight the IBF champion Daniel Dubois. So where does that possibility stand?
Ми хочемо бій Дюбуа, команда моя готова.
We want to fight Dubois. My team is ready. A lot depends on how God will give us a way to do it. And the second is the person who can do it. It's His Excellency Sheikh Turki Al-Sheikh. Because he is the person who can organize this fight. Because I think there would be obstacles otherwise. The only person who can organize is His Excellency and the Riot season. You know, I always fought on the land of my opponents. At present, Saudi Arabia has created the best environment and organizes fights. So, it has become like my second home. When I box in Saudi Arabia, it feels like home. Great people, great fans. We can go to look around and meet with people. Currently, we cannot host fights in Ukraine, but we can have them in Saudi Arabia. They are very kind to us, so it has become our second home.
But Oleksandr, you have said that you probably have maybe 2 more fights left in your career before retiring. Do you stand by that? And who would be the perfect opponents?
На даний момент я не знаю, хто це буде, але так в мене.
At the moment, I don't know who my opponent are going to be. But yes, I have 2 fights to go in my unbelievable journey. Listen, for over 20 years, no one could organize undisputed heavyweight fight. Saudi Arabia did it. His Excellency has done it, and they can do it again. Fans want to see the fight very much, and I most want to box there.
Переважно я хочу боксувати в Саудівській Аравії.
Now, there is a lot of interest in the public in seeing boxing also being mixed with other fighting styles. And the UFC fighter, Alex Pereira, has expressed an interest in a crossover fight with you. Is that something that interests you as your final fight before retirement, maybe?
Да, мені б це було цікаво, але після...
Yes, I would be interested. But only after the fight with Daniel, to match our belts. I mean, consider the option of fighting in a cage. It's a joke, but every joke contains an element of truth.
Oleksandr, given your remarkable career, is your main ambition to remain unbeaten and unharmed, or is there something else you would like to achieve in boxing?
My main goal is to make boxing great.
Now, as you grow older, how much harder do you have to work at keeping your body at the same level of strength and stamina?
Of course, a lot of changes. My team ensures that I have everything for a good recovery and everything for me to handle challenges so that I continue to win.
There has been more awareness in recent years about the dangers of constantly receiving blows to your head in a sport such as boxing. What concerns do you have, if any, that you're at risk for such kind of head injuries or trauma?
It's important to check a boxer's health, to have a doctor on the team, a team that will continuously monitor body, head, heart, and overall condition. And the athlete also needs to monitor his health very, very, very closely and constantly check his condition. Everything that happens with athletes is the consequences of the mistakes that their team make.
You know, Oleksandr, there are fighters like Tyson Fury. Now he said he's retired, but many people can't stay out of it. If and when the time comes, what will you miss most about the sport once you're retired?
I think I will most miss the fights and all the hard work that I have done throughout my life. I think I'll keep training and do training camps with my team to maintain my fitness. Because in the same way you enter a big sport, you should stop in the same way. It's the same as training hard for 20 years to be a good boxer. When finishing your career, you also need training to maintain health and routine. I'll keep making boxing better and I will spend more time with my children. I'm also planning to have a small farm with chicken, a cow and some other animals. I will eat fresh eggs for breakfast and will grow berries.
It's wonderful. Now, I was actually in Saudi Arabia before both of your fights with Tyson Fury. We missed the chance to speak with you at the first one when we were there, but got you now. Do you think Tyson Fury will stay retired, or do you think he might return to the ring? I mean, do you miss him? Do you stay in touch with him outside the ring?
We don't communicate at present. Probably in the future we will. I'm sad and miss this great guy, our interaction. We had 24 rounds. It's like a lifetime. Like you live with someone for 20 years, so it's very, very long road for both of us. It's the same with my unbelievable friend, Tyson Fury.
Yeah, of course. It was very well anticipated and people loved the competition you guys had. Now, what do you think of the boxing league announced by Dana White and Saudi's leading sports guy, His Excellency Turki al-Sheikh? Would you compete in Dana's new organization?
Amazing. Amazing idea. I think His Excellency is doing a lot for the sport. It's wonderful that new initiatives are created, and I support it. Many people think things may not work, but it's important to do new things, always.
Interestingly enough, you've entered the world of Hollywood now, alongside Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson for the movie The Smashing Machine. Are you looking to become the next Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe?
Ні, я не думаю, що я майбутній Арнольд Шварценеггер, ні в якому разі. Я не такий моцний, як він.
I don't think I will be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not as solid, but I practice acting. I would like to be in a movie. I see myself in dramatic role. I think I'll be able to act well.
Свого героя, якого б я грав, цікавим.
Well, before you hang up your gloves and go into the lights of the movie world full time, is there any chance you would compete in that boxing league in Saudi before retiring?
I'm not against it, but I have not been invited to to participate in this league. But if such a proposal comes through, my team and I will seriously consider it.
Команди ми все це розглянемо.
I'm sure if Dana White and His Excellency Turki al-Sheikh are listening, you will get that invite. Now, just a little bit to talk about Ukraine and how the war has affected your life. How has the conflict personally affected the way you live your life and the people you care about?
Слухайте, ну переживання в нас вмирають.
We are very worried. My people are dying, relatives, missiles are flying over our heads. So we are very worried, and we are helping our country as much as we can. Our country wants peace, prosperity, and development. We live in a war zone, and how it's impacting us. It's very worrying for me, my close ones, and my team. It's horrible what's happening here. People see it on TV, but they still don't get the full picture of how horrible this war is. We're talking right now and the sirens are going off. That means that I must go to a shelter or a basement.
Бомбоубіжище чи в якийсь підвал. Ну, тобто прямо зараз є тривога на вулиці.
Oleksandr, we won't keep you too long, but I do want to ask you, I mean, apart from the pressure of being the world's top boxer, you also have the pressure of being a symbol of hope and resilience for your people. How do you cope with that? How do you manage that during this difficult time?
Я кажу Господу Богу кожного дня.
I thank God every single day, many times a day. If this second, hour, year, God gives me such challenges, that means I can handle them. I say thank you to God for everything I have and everything I don't have, for everything difficult and bad. I also thank Him in my prayers and actions.
За погане, я за все йому кажу дякую. І в молитві, і в ділах.
I wonder, Oleksandr, how your experience of serving in the military changed your perspective on the war and how optimistic you are about the future of Ukraine after the war ends, especially when it comes to rebuilding.
Я дуже оптимістичний, тому що я прям впевнений, що моя країна буде процвітати. Я впевнений, що у моєї країни буде...
I'm very optimistic about the future of Ukraine. I'm sure Ukraine will prosper. It will have a strong economy, a good recovery. Our men who are defending our country and our youth wants to see growth of the country. I'm real optimist. I'm 100% sure that my country will reach a high economic level in the world.
На великому рівні економічному і в світі. Коли я вступив в ТРО...
When I entered the territorial defense forces, it was natural human reaction to be fearful. Missiles and warplanes were flying. We were all scared. But as Ukrainian, as a husband, as a father, I did not consider leaving the country and taking my family. My wife and I agreed straight away that we were not going to leave. What happens, happens. I was praying to God that He saved my family from the bullets and missiles. My team and I took arms and went to defend our country.
Oleksandr, I want to thank you for making the time, for spending the time with us. Stay safe and all the best to you.
Have a nice day. I go to work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Stay safe. A fascinating gloves-off conversation with the incredible athlete Oleksandr Usyk. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Mexico City. It's got cultural attractions and a gastronomy scene you won't be able to resist. Aside from the sights to see and things to do, Mexico is hailed for many other achievements. In the city, crime is down and the air is clean. Plus, the capital city has already gone through many achievements. Its commute system is very efficient and accessible too. It's got a green movement that balances out the modernity of the metropolis. Biking is very much welcome here, that on weekends, some roads are closed to make way for cyclists. Inviting, with pep and vigor and buzzing with energy, Mexico City is definitely one to get to know. Mexico City's historic center includes Coyoacan, which is the original settlement for the conquistadores. Today, it has become an enclave of artists and writers such as Frida and Diego, and it exudes colonial charm. A worthy place to visit is Zocalo, which is the center of the city. It is a vast plaza flanked by the Cathedral of Mexico City, the National Palace, and the Colonial Arcade. Zocalo is in fact one of the world's largest city squares. Also nearby are a cluster of vendors. Among their products are shawls, knitted sweaters, pottery, beaded jewelry, and intricately carved figures in stone, obsidian, and all manners of trinkets. Calle Madero is a pedestrian destination that connects the Zocalo with other iconic places. You'll find the Banco Nacional de Mexico nearby. Within the greenery of Bosque de Chapultepec, Mexico's Central Park is the Castillo de Chapultepec. It is called the Castillo de Chapultepec and is one of the city's gems. It is known for its gilded rooms, sweeping marble staircases, sprawling terraces, and Versailles-like carriages. One of the world's great museums is the National Museum of Anthropology. It features one of the most important collections of hard-to-find pre-Hispanic artifacts. Other noteworthy places include the Frida Kahlo Museum. Then, there's also the Diego Rivera Studio, where you'll see brushes, jars of pigments, and skeletons of demonic figures there. Mexico City is also a place to eat. Must-tries include enchiladas, short ribs or turkey, tostadas, carnitas de pescado, and other seafood creations. The city is a good place to enjoy the scene, the people, and culture as you dine. There is simply a bevy of culinary feats in Mexico City.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. The Olympic Games can trace its history back to the days of ancient Greece. But the modern Games has to deal with a very different range of issues both on and off the track, pool or piste. From wars and global warming to doping and transgender athletes, the International Olympic Committee faces a series of obstacles worthy of a steeplechase to reach the finish line of producing a successful summer or winter event. Well, for the first time in 12 years, the world's most important sporting body is about to have a new figure on top of the podium. 7 candidates have entered the race to replace Thomas Bach as the president of the International Olympic Committee. Each candidate will present their pitches to the committee next week before the final decision is made in March. Among them is the Swedish-born British billionaire businessman, environmentalist and president of the International Ski Federation, Johan Eliash. We sat down for a fascinating conversation about his vision for the future of the Olympics, including the possible addition of new sports, transgender athletes, and why Africa and the Middle East should expect to be among the host cities under an Eliash presidency. Johan Eliash, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Now, you wear a lot of different hats, but let's go back to September 2024, when you were announced to be in line for presidency of the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. Why are you so keen to have that job?
So, I'm really inspired by sports' ability to unite people in peace, in harmony, working together, where everything seems to be possible, nothing impossible. And it's that inspiration that I find really fascinating, and I think also is something that is unique about sport and the Olympic movement.
You're up against a fairly competitive field of candidates, including His Royal Highness Prince Faisal Al Hussein of Jordan, Lord Sebastian Coe, who's President of World Athletics from the UK, and Juan Antonio Samaranch, whose father ran the IOC for 21 years. What do you have to say about your fellow candidates and why you would be the better pick?
So I think we have a phenomenal field of candidates. In my case, I have a long background and lots of experience in many areas which are very important to the Olympic movement. I have served in governments. I have been very active in sustainability, climate change, and climate action. I have been a keen athlete. I have turned around big companies. I managed big companies. I'm used to managing change in a very fast-changing world. I understand media, broadcasting, sponsorship, sports marketing. So I have a unique set of skills. And it wasn't by design, but it just happens to be that when you bring all this together, I am in a way uniquely qualified for the job.
We'll go through all the challenges that you might face if you become president of the IOC, but there are many people who say, why do we still need the Olympics? Why are they still relevant?
And again, it has this unique ability to unify, where athletes come to the games in a peaceful environment, and where the movement is also a very strong voice for bringing awareness to many important issues, and can do a lot more than governments can, big institutions like the United Nations or the G20 has ever been able to do.
Well, the IOC has a fairly checkered history with a lot of controversies, including doping scandals, the issue of bribery allegations linked to rigging of bids to host the Olympics, and then the banning of Russia's anthem, flag, and name from international sporting events. Considering all these issues, do you really still want the job?
As I said, I think the Olympic movement is phenomenal, what it does. And yes, it has a rich history and it's had its challenges. And that's also why it's so important to have an experienced and qualified leader of the movement. Because the expectations are set very high. And if something goes wrong, the consequences can be very damaging.
What is your vision for the Olympic movement, and how would you ensure that it remains relevant in the coming decades? Let's go to the headlines first, and then we can explore in more detail.
So, I mean, what is very important is that we stay ahead of the curve in every sense, and that is we need to put the sport at the front. Same with the athletes. Strong focus on the athletes. We need to be very good on digital. AI is clearly something that is going to have a profound impact. It's not going to think for us, but we can make things, a lot of things, much more efficient and easier to attain by using AI. Technology, of course, same thing here. We need to embrace new technologies, make sure that when new technologies are invented, bring them into what we do. We need to defend our political neutrality, and that's really important, that athletes are not weaponized for political purposes, because no athlete can ever choose where he or she was born and shouldn't suffer the consequences of their political leaders. Sustainability is another very important topic. And here it is important that we are seen as responsible, that we take action, we do our bit. Because climate action is not just we can't sit back and expect governments or other big organizations to do something. What we can do is we can spread awareness, because this is an existential threat that is going to be solved by each individual.
We'll get into some of those issues in just a moment, but I want to touch on the fact that the Olympic Games do bring in billions of dollars for the IOC, and yet there's growing concern about the costs associated with hosting the Olympic Games. So what reforms would you propose in order to address those challenges?
So here I believe we can do more for less, using new technologies, perhaps involving the international federations more in the event delivery. Because let's face it, we do these events day in, day out. The IOC, they do events 2 weeks every 2 years. So are there synergies there? Absolutely. We just need to figure out how we can best take advantage of them. So yes, I believe we can do more for less. And yes, I think with technology opportunities, digital opportunities, clear sponsorship architectures that are constantly developed, and choosing the right strategy for what kind of broadcaster we want to be in the future, there is great scope for generating much more revenue and reduce our cost structure.
Now, Mr. Eliash, how would you address the growing concerns about the commercialization of the Olympic Games while trying to maintain their integrity and prestige?
Well, I mean, every sport has to be commercial in the way it approaches things, without compromising the integrity of the sport, the athletes, and of course, delivering an event that has the biggest possible reach. And it's always a fine balance between reach and the money, but you can always find the right balance. And here is where we need to think very carefully about how we can, for instance, use streaming more effectively to get a bigger footprint in terms of viewership, and how we can advance storytelling, because there are so many wonderful stories and so many stories that people are interested in between the games, so that we're not just relevant for 2 weeks every 2 years.
Well, TV advertising has long been the mainstay for the Olympic Games, but younger generations, younger audiences tend to consume content across social media rather than the mainstream media or legacy media. So how should the IOC adapt to the digital era?
Well, that's very much something that we have to adapt to, because people consume content differently today. And it may not have shown up entirely in the numbers that we see from linear broadcasters or in terms of long-term sponsorship arrangements. Here, we need to be very much digging in deep, analyzing, and here, I mean, people, just to give you one trend, people, they want highlights, they want short clips, they don't necessarily use television screens, but their mobile phones to consume content. And here, new technologies such as cloud-based delivery of programming is going to be essential. The IOC, they have been doing a great job at taking this to heart, and this is something that we have to intensify and do even more about, so we always stay ahead of the curve.
Mr. Eliash, I know that for years you've combined your passion for both sports and sustainability through rainforest conservation to combat climate change, even in your role as president of the International Ski Federation. So what steps do you think the IOC should take to make the Olympic Games more environmentally sustainable and to reduce their massive carbon footprint?
So, I mean, what we've done at FIS, we've launched an impact program where we look at ways to minimize the carbon footprint everywhere we go. And here with the IOC, I think, and by the way, they have great programs run by Prince Albert, who has really contributed in this area. And here, I believe what is really important is that wherever we go, we leave a legacy behind. And with the Winter Games, here we have new challenges due to change in the climate, which is profound. And that is, we need to go higher and higher in altitude to have snow security. So we need to take that on board. We also need to make sure that therefore the places we pick are not only used once, but can be used many times. We need a rotation scheme, and this has been invented before me, and it is something which I'm fully behind. And I have already said in my capacity as the biggest federation within the Winter Games, because we deliver more than 50% of the medals in the Winter Games and over 80% in the Paralympic Winter Games. And that is, we will support the locations to make sure that those locations invest in the event delivery. And if we do that, we can play a part as a federation. I hope if I'm elected, this is something that I will really push for. And then we'll have a rotation scheme between a set number of regions, locations, where you rotate the games over a long-term cycle.
On a similar theme, FIFA moved the football calendar to allow Qatar to host a Winter World Cup. And Saudi Arabia will be hosting the tournament in 2034. So would you be prepared to move the Summer Olympics to winter in order to accommodate hot climate countries so that they can host the event?
Well, if you look at the front page of my manifesto, curiously, what you see there is a picture of the globe with Africa, the Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia. And there's a thought behind that, and that is these are places where we haven't been. We've been to South America, we've been to China, we've been to Australia, and of course Europe, North America, and so forth. But we must not forget Africa. It's a big continent with a lot of people, and this is a place we need to go to. Same with the Middle East. We've never been in the Middle East, and we haven't been to India. Now, some people may say that this would be challenging because of calendar issues, lack of infrastructure in some places, etc. But careful planning, and if we plan ahead, I am convinced that we can overcome every obstacle and deliver magnificent games. In fact, wherever we go in the world.
Well, Saudi Arabia is fast becoming known as a location for hosting top international events, from football and boxing to golf and tennis. Would you welcome a bid from Saudi Arabia to host the Olympic Games?
We should encourage each and everyone to apply, and I would say in the case of Saudi Arabia, their commitment and dedication to sport is fantastic, and I remember years ago when they started promoting the idea of actually doing snow-based events. People said that can't be true. Where do you find snow in Saudi Arabia? But they actually do have snow, and they do have mountains reaching 2,600 meters, and they have invested in building up ski resorts. So yes, everything is possible. Yeah, if Saudi Arabia applied, I think we should take that very, very seriously.
Earlier, you mentioned that the Olympic Games can be a platform for unity, peace, and justice. If so, how can the IOC make judgments on who can participate at times of geopolitical conflict, such as we have with Russia, Ukraine, or Israel, Gaza?
Yeah, so here there is one very important principle, and that is athletes, they can't choose where they were born. So, and at the same time, they should never be politicized or weaponized for political purposes. That's sacrosanct for me and for, I hope, most people. And here we have to defend sports political neutrality. Of course, we are always going to tread in political waters, but we have to defend our political neutrality because otherwise it's a slippery slope which does not end up in a good place. And here we have a special program for independent neutral athletes, which worked very well during Paris. And if it has to be used, then of course, this should be used, but we should never be drawn into politics.
The vast majority of Olympic athletes and audiences watching at home want to be sure that they're watching a fair competition devoid of cheating and doping scandals and so on. If you become IOC president, how would you reassure them?
So I think here, I mean, we have very good anti-doping agencies in WADA, and we have very stringent testing programs to make sure that this is very much monitored and to avoid anyone cheating. Of course, another topic that has come up is with women's sport, and how, for me at least, very important that we ring fence women's sport. Now, this is a separate topic, but I bring that up because it's been talked about much, and here it is very much. We have to protect women, ring fence their sport, because if not, it becomes something else, and that can never be the case.
Well, that became a major issue in Paris when the Olympics were held there, where the issue of transgender athletes became a big debate. How would you approach that particular issue?
Very much science-based, not based on trends or ideology. It has to be science-based. It's the only fair way of doing it.
There's only one woman in the lineup of 7 candidates to be IOC president. What would you do to promote greater gender equality, not just in the Olympic participation, but also in the IOC leadership roles?
I think across the board here, the IOC have done a very good job at promoting gender equality and making sure that you have balanced gender participation. This is something that I very much promoted also within the FIS. I say here that it should have been more women in this race, and hopefully in years to come, next time there will be more women candidating for the presidency.
When we look at athletes across the global spectrum, there's still a huge discrepancy in terms of the resources available to competitors, from training facilities and equipment to ideal nutrition to the latest scientific training techniques, and even access to sports medicine to deal with injuries in the best way possible. So what can the IOC do to level the playing field so that athletes from developing nations have the same kind of opportunities as those from established sporting nations?
This is why the IOC have solidarity programs to proliferate and to help and invest in countries that are developing from the developing world. And this is really important. And is one thing that I've always said is that within the International Ski Federation, no matter where you come from, where your federation is based, we're all equally special. And that is very important to me. So we should all have equal opportunity as far as it is possible. Equal opportunity training, equal opportunity to participation. Now, of course, we're not there yet, and that's not going to happen overnight. But we must strive to achieve that.
Now, I know, Mr. Elias, you're a very enthusiastic and accomplished skier, and you'll know that snowboarding was kind of looked down upon compared with traditional skiing for a long time. And there are many sports fans who have strong views about what sports should be added or could be added to the Olympic Games. In recent years, we've had BMX, skateboarding, and even breakdancing added to the Summer Games, while, of course, snowboarding has long been now a part of the Winter Olympic Games. How do you get the balance right between appealing to younger generations with these newer sports while still preserving the tradition of the competition?
Yeah, I mean, that's really important because we compete against lots of other sports. And we have to remain super attractive. Yeah, here it's we need to bring in be open-minded and bring in new sports. It's very, very important. I mean, at FIS, for instance, I brought in free ride. Why did I do that? Because it's super attractive. It has a great following, and I mean the television pictures that you get are fantastic, and that is what we need. Similarly, I mean, if we look here at new format, what I would do is promote relays with able-bodied and Paralympic athletes, because that will help. It's to proliferate Paralympics, lift that up more, and create more interest. And the more interest we can have in the Paralympics, the better it is for sport as a whole. So yeah. It's small, sometimes big ideas in this direction. And of course, there are many sports out there that we should continue bringing in. But of course, we can't do everything in one go. So we need to do this gradually, step by step.
Now, I'd like to get your view on just a couple of sports that have strong support for inclusion in the Olympic Games. They require more skill than athleticism. So let's have a look at esports and darts. Now, why shouldn't dart players take their place alongside, for example, archers in the Olympic Games?
So if we start with esports, this is something which has grown immensely in popularity. There's over 260 million participants in esports, and that is very complementary for the Olympic movement, and that is why we have a strong push there. And we'll have the first esports Olympics very soon in Saudi Arabia, by the way. Now, when it comes to darts and other new sports, there is obviously a long list of sports that want to participate, and again, this has to be done step by step. It has to be evaluated, and that is an ongoing process, which, by the way, the IOC have been very good at.
Now, I'd like you to take a step back from your potential role as president of the IOC to that of just a spectator of sports, because there are many people who believe the Olympics have drifted quite far from their original spirit of just fair, free international competition, now marred very much by politicking and scandals. What chance is there to get the Olympic Games right back to their roots?
Well, it should always be based on pure competition, but how we display the sport, that is constantly evolving with social media, with different, storytelling, which is very important, particularly to remain relevant in between the games. Youth Olympic Games, qualifying series, etc. So the competitive spirit, that principle, that will always be there. I can't see how that would ever change. Now, for us to remain competitive with other sports, it's equally very important that we stay ahead of the curve, and this is where the whole, shall we say, sports environment has to be closely observed, and we have to keep up with the latest trends and invest in the latest technology, and that's the foundation for what we do.
Well, we wish you well for your IOC candidacy. I wonder, will you have time to devote to all the other things you do, especially sustainability projects like Cool Earth, the organization you co-founded for rainforest conservation? Will you be able to cram all this in, since you have so much on your plate all the time?
I think today there are many very good people involved in these activities. So I'm sure they will continue that work with or without me. So, but the one thing I am really committed to, and that is proliferating our voice in climate action, to spread awareness and getting things done, because here we can do a lot.
Well, Johan Eliash, it was a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Johan Eliash there on his bid to become president of the International Olympic Committee. Well, we talked about some potential new sports for the Games, with BMX, skateboarding and snowboarding winning their place at the Olympic schedule in recent years, and breakdancing making its debut at last year's Paris Olympics. But did you know that as different events come and go, some of those which have fallen out of favour included tug of war, hot air ballooning, live pigeon shooting and painting. That admittedly was a bit like watching paint dry. And at the first modern Olympics at the English village of Much Wenlock in 1867, the most popular event was called Tilting at the Ring, in which riders on horseback used a lance to unhook a small metal ring from a wooden crossbar. I wonder if it's time for that one to return. Well, we know who to ask if he gets the job. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, in a high-stakes phone call, President Putin pledges to President Trump that Russia will temporarily stop attacking Ukrainian energy facilities, but he declines to endorse a full 30-day ceasefire. World leaders call for a halt in the hostilities in Gaza and a political solution to the conflict. This is a second day of Israeli strikes on the enclave, kill at least 10 more Palestinians. And 2 NASA astronauts returned to Earth 9 months after they began what was supposed to be a week-long stay aboard the International Space Station. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin with the latest on last night's lengthy telephone conversation between the US President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, during which a number of agreements were reached. Well, President Putin agreed to temporarily halt attacks on Ukrainian energy facilities. He approved a prisoner exchange and agreed to engage in talks about security in the Black Sea. However, the Russian leader declined to endorse a full 30-day ceasefire, which President Trump had hoped would serve as the first step towards a more lasting peace deal. Well, despite that, President Trump, who has had a complicated relationship with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, spoke positively about his call with his Russian opposite number.
We had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace. And we talked about other things also.
President Trump there. Well, when asked if President Putin had demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine, the US president responded that the issue hadn't been addressed during their telephone conversation.
We didn't talk about aid, actually. We didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
Well, amidst fears that the United States is shifting its position in favor of Russia, Ukrainians in Kyiv reacted to that telephone conversation between the two leaders, with some believing that President Trump is too lenient on President Putin.
I would like it to happen, freezing strikes on our energy infrastructure, but Russia is not only hitting the energy infrastructure, but also many civilian areas and other targets, while Ukrainians are only targeting Russia's energy facilities. I think that this is a way to take away Ukraine's last leverage, while Russia will be able to hit other targets as well, which is already what they're doing.
Okay, reaction there on the streets of Kyiv. Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak now to Mick Mulvaney, former Chief of Staff to President Donald Trump, who joins us now from Washington. Mick, great to have you with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. In your opinion, what was achieved during that 2-hour-long telephone conversation?
Well, anytime you can have a 2-hour-long conversation with somebody, it's probably going to be positive in some fashion. My experience in the White House was that the bad conversations got very short, very brief, very quickly. So if you can have that rapport and that dialogue for that length of time, my guess is that by itself is going to have some value. I'm not really sure that Trump expected this, though, Tom. I get the sense from a lot of his dialogue before he won the election, since he's come into office again, from a lot of his body language, that he thought this might be easier, that the Russians might be more interested in drawing a close to hostilities faster than they actually are. So there's a sense of frustration, I think, coming from the White House. Certainly progress was made yesterday, although now we're hearing reports here in Washington this morning, as you and I talked, that the Russians have not abided by the temporary cessation on attacks on energy infrastructure, and that overnight they may have attacked some Ukrainian facilities. That would be a bad sign. But generally speaking, I think there's frustration. Slow progress, slower than they wanted, and that's frustrating to them.
Yeah, so overall, as you're saying, not quite as simple as picking up the telephone and ending the war. And in terms of the essence and what was actually agreed upon, I mean, what you're saying is this all fell rather short of expectations.
I think so. Certainly if your expectations were that you could have a phone call and figure out a way to get at least a temporary ceasefire, a 30-day deal, then there has to be sort of a disappointment in not being able to get that. What I think is really more interesting to watch is whether or not the Russians will abide by what they said they would do yesterday. Again, there's some indication that they've already reneged on the deal that they had reached with Trump last night. So, look, the Russians are tough negotiators. There's no question. Trump knows that, or at least he should know that. And I think he is finding it a little bit more difficult than he expected.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, within less than 24 hours of that telephone call taking place, we were getting reports from both sides actually accusing each other of violating the new agreement. A little bit of told you so from some European leaders who are saying that President Putin's rejection of that 30-day truce, they say, is proof that Moscow isn't really serious about peace. How does it look to you?
Well, that's been the knock on the Russians from the very beginning, right? Is that they're not trustworthy negotiating partners. I take everything, look, and I don't mean to demean the European leadership. I spent a lot of time there. I have a lot of friends there, but they don't like Donald Trump very much. They still, I think in Europe especially, they're still stunned that he won the election. And they're still having to deal with that. So I have to take everything they say with a grain of salt. But I think they probably have a point here, is that, again, if you ask them, 3 months ago, if it would be easy to negotiate a ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, they would have said, no, it's very, very difficult. And it turns out that they're closer to being right than people probably wanted them to be in this country.
Some analysts saying that President Putin gave President Trump just enough during that call last night to prevent the talks as being headlined as having been a failure. Do you agree with that?
You could look at it 15 different ways. I know there's a lot of experts who make a living doing exactly what you just described. So having been there, having been on these phone conversations, having been in the White House, if I'm on the phone call yesterday and the chief of staff certainly was listening in, or at least got a transcript afterwards, you're looking for signs of positive momentum. That's what you're looking for, right? Is you're trying to figure out, okay, where can we build on? What good comes from this conversation? A 2-hour conversation, Tom, is critical, and I come back to the length of it for a specific reason. There's a lot of information changed. If you and I are trying to do a deal together, and we spend a good bit of time talking, maybe each one of us picks up information that makes it easier for us to get a deal, something we didn't know about the other side, so we didn't know about what they were interested in. And that is how you can sort of maybe, under certain circumstances, start to build a deal that otherwise might not have been available to you. That's what I think the White House is doing this morning. Whether or not you characterize it as a failure, as a success, the media will do more of that. If you're actually on the ground trying to get a deal done, you're looking as to whether or not you moved the ball in that direction last night. And my guess is they probably did at least just a little bit.
I mean, do you think the talks, direct conversation was perhaps a little hasty and perhaps more groundwork needed to be done before that? And so that when the two men did speak, they had a pretty clear idea of what was feasible, what was achievable? Because it seems, to a certain extent, like President Trump went in there with expectations right up here and he got something around here. I mean, is that a fair reading?
I think that's certainly the textbook approach to international affairs, right? Is you have the back channel conversations, the lower level conversations, and by the time the principals, the two people at the top of any bilateral conversation talk, that most of the details have at least been hammered out in principle. That's just not how Donald Trump works. Yes, there's always going to be a role for those back channel and lower level negotiations and discussions. My guess is those discussions went on before that call and are continuing today as you and I speak. But Donald Trump wants to talk to the principal himself. He believes in his own ability to get deals done. Certainly his life experience would say there's a good bit of evidence that he's right about that. So while that is what you've just described as textbook, sometimes you need to know when to throw the book out and do it your own way. And that's what Trump is probably doing.
Sure. And I mean, up until now, he's tended to regard President Zelensky as being the difficult party here. Do you think he's perhaps having a bit of a rethink? Do you think perhaps there is a bit of a rethink happening in the Trump administration about how to approach President Putin, for example?
If there's a rethink, I think it has to do with the relationship with Putin, not with Zelensky. I think they're pretty firm in their fact that they don't trust Zelensky. Look, there's a long history that isn't well known internationally. This is one of my frustrations, especially when I deal with my European friends, is that Ukraine has been and continues to be one of the most corrupt places on the face of the planet. We actually had special rules on the books here in the United States about dealing with Ukraine, even when it came to U.S. foreign aid. It is and was a very corrupt place, and that colors, I think, a lot of Trump's opinions about Zelensky and about Ukraine, generally speaking. I don't think that is going through a rethink here today. I think they might be doing exactly what you've just mentioned, which is looking at Putin saying, you know what, maybe he wasn't as interested in peace as we thought that he was. Maybe he is interested in dragging this out longer than we thought he was. Maybe he is able to put his people through more deprivation than he has up to this point. And maybe we underestimated that. So yeah, again, at a 2-hour conversation, I hate to come back to the length, but a lot of information will exchange hands. So the U.S. team, the Trump team, has a lot more information available to them this morning than they did yesterday, and they might be using that to use your words, a little bit of a rethink of how to approach this.
Yeah, and we've got a result, actually, a proof of some of the fruit of that telephone conversation coming into us right now. Actually, it's being reported that Russia and Ukraine have exchanged 372 POWs. That's according to the Russian Defense Ministry. So that's a result, isn't it?
It is, and that's what you're looking for in that phone conversation is, okay, if we can't make progress on aid, if we can't make progress on total cessation of hostilities, where can we start? How do we crawl before we walk and then walk before we can run? So certainly information about the POWs it would be, again, what are you looking for? Positive momentum, and the POWs probably qualifies for that.
I just want to ask you, because you were telling us about what it's like to be in the room, presumably the Oval Office, I don't know, perhaps it isn't, when a call like that takes place between President Trump and, a high-level foreign leader like President Putin. Just talk us through who's in the room when that happens, and just tell us some details, anything you can remember from any similar calls that you sat in on, what sort of things.
Sure, it's not any great trade secrets or anything like that. On a call of that level, again, I have no information about the specific call. I wasn't there. I'm no longer in the White House. But a call of that level, I'd be curious, by the way, first and foremost, to know if the conversation took place in English. My guess is there were translators on both sides, and that is important, Tom. And we saw this with Zelensky. When Zelensky came into the White House a couple of weeks ago in that famous or infamous face-to-face meeting with President Trump and Vice President Vance, he was speaking English. I think that was a mistake. He used a line where they asked him about the clothes that he was wearing, and he said, well, it's wartime. When the war is over, then maybe I will wear the costume again. In American English, that's almost an insult. Until you figure out that the word costume is the direct translation in Ukrainian language to suit, to what you are wearing right now. So there's that opportunity for a misinterpretation, or at least sort of a misunderstanding as to intention based upon translation from a different language. So I'm hopeful that at that meeting yesterday, they were not speaking English. Trump obviously doesn't speak Russian, but they were using translators. The translator would be there. Certainly the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, would be there. My guess is maybe the Secretary of State would be there as well, possibly even the Secretary of the Treasury, depending upon the issues they expected to come up. So this would be a very, very high level sort of conversation. The Chief of Staff would be there, and maybe one or two staffers as well, probably the press secretary, so that they can figure out what the messaging would be outward. So it's a fairly large crowd on the American side there in the Oval Office.
Yeah, you make a really good point about translators there, and that's something that I think a lot of people won't have thought of, and how those false friends, those words that don't quite translate the way you think they're going to translate, can actually give a totally wrong impression. I just want to ask you about your own experience of being in the Oval Office when a call like that happens. I mean, did you ever have situations in which President Trump was on a call and you sort of had to poke him or prod him or put the call on mute and just perhaps slip him a note and say, not so fast, Mr. President, or anything like that ever happen?
No, if there's any interaction between the president and the staff, first of all, he would solicit it. He might hit the silence button and ask for input. Staff doesn't tell the president they're doing something wrong. Typically what you would do, and that goes for every president, by the way, you would never do that in front of a foreign leader for sure. If you are slipping him notes, it's sort of to remind him that maybe there's 4 or 5 other things that we need to get to before the call is over, to remind him. You might say, now, remind me so I don't forget that we have to talk about X, Y, and Z, and you would do that. So there's some interaction between him and the staff. But let's face it, I mean, this is why you run for the job, right? This is poker at the very highest levels. The President of the United States, the President of Russia, it doesn't get any higher level than this. So the principle is really going to dominate the conversation, and that's the way it should be.
It's being reported that the two men talked about other things apart from Ukraine, some of them quite sort of light topics like ice hockey. And for some reason, that's been really picked up on by the Russian media. They seem to really like the fact that the two men talked about ice hockey. I mean, why do you think that was a winning topic of discussion?
Yeah, and our media has picked up on it as well, Tom. And again, I think this is part of the difficulty we face in when we get our news from media generally. And I'm not casting aspersions on any particular outlet, but media, that is plural for medium, which means you stand between two other things. There's a medium between you and the information. So there's a filter, and the filter right now, the media are talking about all these ordinary things. Look, you and I, before we were having this conversation, might have a conversation about 5 or 6 different things. Your suit, the weather here in Washington, D.C. It's how human beings communicate. So to think you're going to have a 2-hour conversation and maybe not talk about, I don't know, family, sports, the weather, something else they read in the news, that's how human beings communicate most of the time. I've never understood this this impression that just because people get elected to high office, they're somehow not human beings anymore. So no, it doesn't surprise me. I've been on 1,000 conversations with Trump, and I can tell you he likes the chit chat and the banter to talk about other things. Again, it's a good way to get information. You might learn something about somebody that you might otherwise not know. And maybe they talked about hockey, and maybe we end up with seeing a U.S. versus the Soviet Union, versus Russia hockey match or something like that from this, as the two countries try to rebuild the relationship after the war. I don't know, but I don't know why people are so surprised that in a conversation like that, they talked about things other than Ukraine.
Sure. So we might move on from ping pong diplomacy to ice hockey diplomacy, as you say.
It's a great way. I forgot all about it. That's exactly right.
It was a long time ago. Let's just wrap up by sort of looking forwards. I mean, clearly, most people that we've spoken to have characterized the fact that this dialogue is taking place as having been a positive thing. Dialogue is better than no dialogue. But what's the next step?
Action, something. And I'm just glad to hear the news you just told me. I'm hearing for the first time about the POW exchange. We'll see what happens in the next couple of days. I'll be curious to see how the Trump administration, if the reports about the Russian attacks on the Ukrainian energy infrastructure overnight after the agreement was struck are accurate. I'd be curious to see how the Trump team responds to that. I've not heard anything out of the White House yet here this morning, but that will be interesting to watch, because if there's an explanation, that's one thing. If there's no explanation, then you have to wonder, did you have a deal at all? So it will be interesting to see how they respond to the facts on the ground. But we'll look for the other details, how they play out. We'll also look for whether or not there's a follow-up discussion. If things go well, I would expect Donald Trump to have another call in the next several days with Putin as they try to build on any successes that they managed to have hammered out in yesterday's conversation. I'll also be curious to see how the outside world responds, most specifically European leaders and Ukraine, obviously, as to whether or not they consider this to be progress in the proper direction.
Just lastly, you are, of course, the former chief of staff to President Trump. Any parting words of advice that you would impart to the Trump presidency, the Trump administration, on how to deal with the Kremlin and how to perhaps make the next set of talks even more fruitful or more fruitful, depending on how you look at it, than the first lot?
Yeah, I've got a variety of opinions about the people that the president has chosen to put around him. I think he's got some really good people. I think he's got some subpar people. But the foreign policy team that he's got, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, I have a great deal of faith in. And I would tell him the same thing I would tell him if I was there is, Mr. President, your call. You're the boss. Your name was on the ballot. 80-some million people voted for you, but you do have a good team here. So listen to them. And my advice really, Tom, would be more to them than to him. And my advice to the staff is always the same, which is tell the president the truth. Don't tell the president what you think he wants to hear. Tell him the truth. And if you hear him say something that isn't right, need to figure out a way to get the right information. That's our job as staffers, to make sure the president has the best information possible. He makes the policy decisions. He makes the final decisions. It's our job to get him the information. So no, I wouldn't have much advice for the president. I'd have a good bit of advice for staff, but that's what the chief of staff does.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure. Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff to President Donald Trump. Thanks again.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak to Oleksandr Usyk, who is a former Ukrainian diplomat, now CEO at the Center for Defense Strategies, who joins us now from Kyiv. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Arabiya News. Those talks between President Trump and President Putin have been characterized as having been a success in Moscow. How are they viewed by Ukraine?
Well, certainly President Trump would describe them as a huge success for himself as well, but it's not that much that is success from our point of view. Let me start with two fundamentals that haven't been changed since these talks. First, Russia wants to subjugate Ukraine, destroy Ukrainian statehood. And Russia failed to do this militarily. That's why they are trying to exploit opportunities to achieve this goal by diplomatic means. And secondly, the United States view their strategic priorities somewhere else, not in Europe and neither in Ukraine. They believe that Russia may be instrumental in deterring China in the Indo-Pacific, Iran in the Middle East, and strengthen security of Israel. That's why for Mr. Trump, Ukraine doesn't matter, and he may try to exchange Ukraine for something that President Putin may offer. During our talks with Americans in Saudi Arabia, there was an agreement that we will go further with the comprehensive ceasefire. It means the ceasefire at air, on land, and at sea. Actually, Mr. Putin just rejected this notion. He proposed to have just one kind of ceasefire which benefits him more than anyone else. What I'm talking about? The Russians has been targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure since the beginning of the reinvasion back in 2022, and certainly it's affect lives of ordinary Ukrainians. In return, Ukrainians are targeting oil refineries in Russia, which are providing gas and materials for their tanks and jets. Plus, they are getting hard currency out of the export of this commodity. Thus, they are fueling the war. So this type of agreement would secure Russia's energy sector, while Ukraine will be suffering from drone and missile strikes to its civilian infrastructure.
Okay.
And actually, there is a difference between the readouts of Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin. In Mr. Trump's document, they say about ceasefire on energy and infrastructure. While in Russian documents, they're talking about only energy infrastructure. And this means that the rest of the facilities may be targeted.
Okay.
And finally, there is another thing. We managed to fend off Russian Black Sea Fleet from our shores. And by doing this, we secured our sea lines of communication, and we were trading with the world, helping countries in need, and particularly suffered from food insecurity. And now the Russians want to have a sort of an agreement which would help them to hamper Ukrainian trade with the outer markets. So that's why I don't think that it's beneficial for Ukraine.
Okay, I mean, some things have come out of this, and you can't ignore them. For example, the exchange of 372 prisoners, that's one outcome. And we understand that President Trump and President Zelensky are speaking right now, or this evening. I mean, things are happening, aren't they?
Well, yes, certainly. I didn't mention the prisoners for exchange, which certainly was the most important thing that happened, but it has been in preparation for weeks before, and it was not a result of the genius negotiation skills of Mr. Trump. Yes, President Zelensky is expected to talk to Mr. Trump to get some details out of this conversation, because, for example, there is another difference in reading of this meeting. The Russians are saying that the American assistance to Ukraine has been discussed, while Mr. Trump rejected that, and he said that they didn't even talk about it, which is a really important factor. This factor is a leverage against Ukraine, and that's why I believe that Mr. Zelensky will likely agree on these proposals, on this ceasefire, because we don't want to undermine our security, and once again to have this pause on security and intelligence assistance to Ukraine.
It doesn't sound like you've got much faith in President Trump's negotiating efforts. I mean, are you of the opinion that he shouldn't be talking to President Putin at all?
Oh, yes, I believe so. President Trump was saying that he will stand on the position of strength, and via strength he will get peace. But in reality, he has been exerting pressure over Ukraine only. There were no new sanctions against Russia. There were no criticism of the Russian conduct in this war or Putin himself, or vice versa. Our president and our country has been under the criticism from Mr. Trump and his colleagues. And if we are talking about the art of the deal, what kind of the art of the deal if you give up the two most important things beforehand? I mean, the idea that Ukraine will never join NATO, and the second thing that Ukraine will not be able to recover its internationally recognized borders. So I don't think that it's a type of negotiations that anyone expected from Mr. Trump. He's trying to cozy up with Putin for obvious reason. He needs a reset with Russia to get Russia on board from China, from Iran, from DPRK, and certainly to get some lucrative deals with Russia. Russia is a pretty rich country, and it will be happy to see sanctions being stripped from Russia and American money pouring into the Russian economy.
Okay, so if you don't think these negotiations are going to have the desired effect from Ukraine's point of view, how else can President Trump or how else can anyone achieve a lasting peace then?
I believe there is only one option, is to strengthen Ukraine, that we will be able to fend off Russians from our territory, either all territory captured since 2014 or some territory. And then when Putin realized that there is no possibility for him to get an advantage on the battlefield, that there is a long will of our European and American and other partners, and it means that he needs to sit around the table and discuss in good faith conditions of peace. But I don't believe that it's possible to have such an agreement with Mr. Putin because he believes he needs to subjugate Ukraine. He conducts a genocidal war against Ukraine. So there is no space for compromise.
We heard from the German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius saying President Putin is, quote, playing a game here, and I'm sure the American president won't be able to sit and watch for much longer. Do you think that, I mean, clearly the German defense minister thinks President Trump is going to have a change of heart and a change of opinion about his dealings with Mr. Putin. I mean, what do you think Boris Pistorius is getting at here?
Well, it's just a common sense because, you know, if you have a look at the history of the US-Russia relations since 1991, each and every American president wanted to start a new, fresh start for relations with Russia, but inevitably they end up in worse relations that they can imagine. So it's a nature of Russia and the United States because they based on different values and they pursue a completely different, opposite the strategic interests. Russia is a revisionist power. It wants to dominate in Europe, to be a hegemon. It wants to sit around the big table of big powers and divide the world and rule the fates of smaller nations. He wants to be respected for his nuclear power because, you know, if you're talking about economy, technology, culture, and many other fields, Russia is not on top of the list. So that's why I have no doubt that after a while, Trump will face the reality that Putin is not negotiable. It's not possible to agree on something except of shady deals or strategic corruption. And it's not in the interest of the United States to have such an ally. It's better to have Europe and some other allies, at least those who were with the United States since 1945. So I believe it's going to happen rather soon than later.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Really appreciate you speaking to us once again on this channel. Oleksandr Usyk, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, Israel has carried out fresh airstrikes in Gaza overnight, with health officials in Gaza saying that more than 430 Palestinians have been killed during the course of the last 2 days. Meanwhile, a UN building in Gaza is reported to have been hit during one airstrike, killing at least one UN worker and injuring several others. But the Israeli army is denying that it struck a UN building. Meanwhile, the White House says Israel consulted the US President Donald Trump's administration before carrying out these latest strikes. Well, there has been widespread condemnation from around the world, including from Egypt, which described these latest airstrikes as a blatant violation of the terms of the ceasefire. Well, more than 430 Palestinians, as we've been saying, have been killed since Israel resumed the bombardment of Gaza in the early hours of Tuesday. And the fresh strikes overnight were carried out by the Israeli military there in Gaza. Well, in a televised address, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the fresh strikes were, quote, just the beginning.
From now on, Israel will act against Hamas with increasing force, and from now on, negotiations will only take place under fire. Hamas has already felt the weight of our force in the last 24 hours, and I want to assure you and them, Hamas, this is only the beginning.
Well, let's get the latest now. We can speak to Juliet Touma, who is the Director of Communications for UNRWA, who joins us now from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Juliet, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We're hearing from the Health Ministry in Gaza that a foreign UN worker has been killed. 5 others have been seriously injured today in an Israeli strike on their headquarters. But Israel is denying this. Can you help us clarify the situation?
Look, we have had at least 2 colleagues killed today in Gaza. We are trying to figure out what exactly happened. What we do know is that this is yet another tragic incident for the UN. It's another black day for our organization. You see, since the war began, almost a year and a half ago, at UNRWA alone, we've had over 280 colleagues killed.
Indeed, and you use the language of Black Day. That's exactly the words being used by Philippe Lazzarini, who expressed his condolences and said that humanitarian workers must be protected at all times, he said in his latest tweet. I mean, when it comes to operating as a humanitarian worker in Gaza, I mean, just how dangerous is it? I mean, you've already mentioned the fact that so many people have been killed during this last year and a half or so. I mean, is anything done to protect them?
Gaza has become very, very fast one of the most dangerous places in the world for humanitarian workers. And if you look at the death toll, that speaks for itself, really. The loss has been huge for the United Nations. First and foremost, the dear colleagues that we continue to lose day in, day out. We've had a respite, obviously, during the ceasefire for a couple of months, but during wartime, we lose team members every single day. Just overnight, since the bombardment resumed in Gaza at UNRWA, we've lost an additional 3 colleagues at least. And this is what was accounted for, what we could verify. The numbers might be even higher. And of course, today with UNOPS and other United Nations agencies. Now, across the board in the Gaza Strip, United Nations facilities, buildings, installations, despite the fact that we share the coordinates with the Israeli authorities and other parties to the conflict, they have been hit at an unprecedented level, massive level. At UNRWA, as an example, 2/3 of our buildings have been hit, and we have 300 buildings at least across the war-torn enclave. So it's really been horrific for the United Nations. We continued, however, despite everything, serving the communities and undertaking our humanitarian commitment.
Yeah, you say that coordinates are shared, but there's a caveat, which is that a ban on UNRWA came into effect on the 30th of January. The Israeli authorities are forbidden, it would appear, from having any contact with UNRWA. Do you think herein lies the issue, that the fact that coordinates were not, there was a breakdown in communications because of this ban on UNRWA, or would you say this is totally unrelated?
So just to clarify, today's very tragic incident was not related to UNRWA. It was a United Nations Operations Service Office, UNOPS, which is a sister United Nations agency. Now, in general, we are a United Nations agency, the parties to the conflict, regardless of local bills or laws that may pass in local parliaments. Parties to the conflict have got to respect the United Nations across the board, including UNRWA. Also, UNRWA is the largest humanitarian agency working in Gaza, whether it is the number of staff that serve with the agency, or it is the footprint that we have with, like I said, over 300 buildings. Parties to the conflict, whoever they are, must continue to respect the UN, including UNRWA.
And yet, until only an hour or two ago, Israel's line was, quote, contrary to reports, the IDF did not strike a UN compound in Deir al-Balah. And the fact they're saying that suggests perhaps they don't know what they struck. I mean, do you think it sounds like it was some sort of a miscalculation or an error on their part?
Look, that I really don't know. What I do know is that during the past year and a half, there's been so many violations, so many hits against the United Nations, so many thick red lines that have been crossed, including violations against the United Nations. And all of these violations must be investigated. All of the violators, all of those undertaking the violations must be held accountable.
So we're now back to a situation where we're seeing death tolls like we saw right at the beginning of the conflict. I mean, extremely high death toll we saw yesterday. What's your understanding of what the needs are and what the situation is on the ground for the people of Gaza?
Oh, we're absolutely fearing the worst. We're fearing that we will go back to the very bleak, horrific days in the first months of this brutal, brutal war. And the death toll that continues to be reported, that continues to increase, is the highest single daily death toll that has been recorded since the war began. The vast majority are believed to be women and children. That is absolutely horrific. And coupled with that is an almost total siege that the Israeli authorities continue to lay on the war-torn enclave in Gaza. No humanitarian assistance and no commercial supplies have gone into Gaza for more than 2 weeks now. If you recall, at the beginning of the war, we had a very similar situation when everything was banned from entering into Gaza, and the consequences of those first 2 weeks of very hermetic siege on the Gaza Strip continued to be felt for months on end. So what we call for is for the resumption of the ceasefire, to go back to that so that the bombardment stops, so the killing of civilians stop, for the renewal of deliveries of humanitarian assistance and also commercial supplies, and for the release of all hostages who are in Gaza, and the release of more Palestinian detainees in line with the agreement that was reached a couple of months ago.
And the fact that no humanitarian aid has been allowed in to Gaza for several days now, what does that mean for organizations like yours and for other NGOs on the ground? You know, are there warehouses, are there depots completely empty now when it comes to food supplies, medicine supplies, fresh water?
It's been more than 2 weeks now, and for an area that depends entirely on handouts, that's an absolute catastrophe. Because during the ceasefire, we were getting in hundreds of trucks of supplies every day, and we managed to replenish and we managed to distribute. But it shows that the dependence on humanitarian handouts by the people of Gaza is very, very high. And so every day when there is no aid, that makes a huge difference. Hence why we got to go back to the resumption of aid deliveries into Gaza. Otherwise, we are going to go back to where we were in the beginning, to the levels of hunger that we've all witnessed, these horrific scenes of babies dying of malnutrition and people dying of dehydration and lack of medical supplies and medical care. The world cannot afford to repeat that tragedy. And what needs to happen is a resumption of the ceasefire, but also it is time for courageous leadership, including in the international community, to bring the sides together towards a peaceful solution to this very, very long and very painful conflict.
So what is your message to the international community, and who would you like to see doing what?
Well, look, several messages. First and foremost is to do whatever possible so that the killing stops of civilians, of women, children, but also of ordinary men, right? I mean, the killing of civilians in Gaza must come to an end. The displacement, the horror must come to an end. There has to be more done by those countries who have influence on the two parties to the conflict, so that the nightmare that the people of Gaza, the people of Israel have lived through since the 7th of October 2023, that is not repeated, that we are at a place where there is a ceasefire, a long-term ceasefire, and then much, much more needs to be done to once and for all address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and reach a peaceful diplomatic solution.
And when we read tweets like the one put out by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying, quote, "I'm outraged by the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. I strongly appeal for a ceasefire to be respected and for humanitarian assistance to be re-established." I mean, do you see him being able to change something with words like that? I mean, who's he appealing to?
He's appealing to anyone who has influence over parties to the conflict. He is our top messenger of peace. He is calling for peace. This is one of the areas that we work in and on in the United Nations, is to bring the sides together towards peace. Peace is long overdue in this current context. I mean, you see, it's been 8 decades of fighting, of renewed cycles of violence, of grief, of loss, of despair. And it is safe to say that since the 7th of October 2023, it's been the worst for people in that area. And so it is time. It is also time for courage, and courage to reach an end to this bloody conflict once and for all in a peaceful, diplomatic way.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Juliet Touma, Director of Communications for UNRWA, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Now, after 9 months stranded in space, 2 NASA astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, have finally returned to planet Earth. Well, their SpaceX capsule made a fast and fiery re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere before 4 parachutes opened up ahead of splashdown off the coast of Florida. Well, this concludes a mission that was supposed to last for just 8 days, but it was dramatically extended after the spacecraft suffered technical problems. Well, earlier on this month, President Trump took a swipe at his predecessor, former President Joe Biden, and accused him of forgetting about Wilmore and Williams. And he made a pledge that Elon Musk and SpaceX would be involved in returning them home. Well, on a lighter note, President Trump appeared to speculate that the 2 NASA astronauts could perhaps have fallen in love after spending 9 months together out in space.
You know, we have 2 people up there that Biden and Kamala left up there. We're coming up to get you. I've authorized Elon. I said, can you get them out? Because, you know, they've been left up there. I hope they like each other, but maybe they'll love each other. I don't know.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Scott Kidd-Petit, a spacecraft pilot of the Polaris Dawn mission in 2024. That's a privately funded human spaceflight that was operated by SpaceX. Scott, or Kidd, don't know which to call you, joins us from New Hampshire in the United States. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Let's talk about splashdown just off the Florida coast last night. Those two NASA astronauts back on planet Earth. What do you think went through their minds as they reached this planet?
So they were up there for 286 days, which is a long time because living in space, it's an austere environment, and there's many challenges you got to overcome. But the beautiful thing about the human body, it adapts to its environment, which also means it's challenging once you get back to gravity, because our bodies are built for 1G. And as far as what they experience on their reentry, you know, it's a several hours process, procedures to get prepared for it. But then they'll do what's called a deorbit burn to slow the vehicle down, so gravity can pull it back into the atmosphere, because it's traveling 17,500 miles an hour, and you got to slow down. And to slow down, it requires, you know, the impact of the atmosphere to drag it down to about 350 miles an hour before they can deploy the drogue chutes, followed by the main parachutes. And then that process is roughly about 10 minutes. It's a pretty intense ride because of the G forces. It's about 4.5 Gs you experience on the way down, which when you haven't experienced Gs for 9 months, it's pretty impactful. And then, you know, it's a gentle splashdown off the coast of Florida in the Gulf of America.
Yeah, they're probably pretty relieved to be back on well, sort of terra firma, although to begin with it was indeed the sea. And of course the craft that they were on would have reached some pretty high temperatures during that 17-hour-long journey back to planet Earth. I just want to ask you though, as someone who's experienced zero gravity before, I mean, what does it do to the human body? You've experienced it for a couple of days. These people, as we were saying, experienced it for 286 days. I mean, what happens to the human body under those sorts of conditions?
Yes. So, you know, when you talk about the launch process, once you get to orbit, again, it takes about 9 to 10 minutes to get to space, and you experience these G forces, very similar to a roller coaster, even an airliner, that centrifugal force pushing on your body. But once you get to orbit, you transition immediately to microgravity, zero gravity. And it's this transition your body goes through. And the first thing you really experience is this fluid shift, because again, you're used to gravity pulling on the fluid in your body, but now it just kind of shifts up. Your organs are moving around, and this cognitive shift happens in your brain. And so it's just, you're forced to adapt to this new environment. There's also something called space adaptation syndrome that can impact up to 50% of astronauts. It's that space motion sickness disorientation. But after a while, you adapt and you become accustomed, especially after a couple days, weeks, months. You know, that's your new environment. You got to stay fit. So that's why they dedicate 2 to 3 hours a day to try to preserve as much fitness as they possibly can. But once you adapt, it's a pretty comfortable environment in microgravity.
Sure. I mean, okay, they're going to be under physical supervision, these two astronauts, for quite a while because of the physical aspects of what their journey and their long mission in space has done to their bodies. What about the mind? What does all of this do? I mean, you touched on it briefly there, but from a mental health point of view, I mean, what sort of effect does space travel and that sort of length of stay away from planet Earth do to your mind?
Tom, that's a great point you bring up. And, you know, like I talked about that initial transition, they call it a cognitive shift. It's this overview effect experience that you have looking at planet Earth from such a high altitude. And it's this paradigm you kind of got to get used to, because you're in this very sterile environment in a capsule, and you're just staring at this beautiful radiant planet. But if you're going to be up there for several months, and when we talk about going back to the lunar surface and eventually Mars and beyond, these missions are just going to get longer and longer and longer. And you have to figure out how to deal with the isolation. You're away from your families who are making big sacrifices while you fulfill this obligation and mission. And so we have to address those concerns. that we're going to experience some type of, depression, isolation. And that's why they dedicate so many hours to the science and research. I mean, we had 40 experiments on our 5-day mission. Butch and Sonny, they participated in over 900 hours of science and research while they were on orbit. Or I believe 500 hours. So I can't remember the number, but it was a substantial amount of time dedicated to experiments that address those concerns about those long duration missions.
Yeah, I don't have the number of hours, but I'm told they worked on some 150 different scientific experiments while they were up there. And what's your understanding as to why what was supposed to be a few days long mission turned into this 286-day ordeal? What went wrong?
Well, what went wrong was some issues with the Starliner, the Boeing vehicle that took them to the ISS. As far as the decision behind closed doors in the Oval Office, I wasn't privy to any of those conversations. There's numerous options that and resources available that SpaceX was prepared to execute on if given the opportunity. But the higher that be made the decisions that they did. And they, stayed up there for 9 months. And I think, if anything, it's just a testament to the resilience of Butch and Sonny to be able to endure those 9.5 months. It's just a demonstration of their professionalism to be able to execute the mission. It's, for me, with a military background, deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, it was, you have a set schedule, but there's always slips, and you have to be able to deal with those circumstances. And it's not only us, it's our families back home as well. But they did a professional job, and we should all be just celebrating the enormous accomplishments of SpaceX and Elon and President Trump.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, President Trump and Elon Musk suggested perhaps that their plight had somehow been the fault of President Biden, the former president of the United States. I mean, I know you say you weren't privy to all the conversations, but is any of that justified in your opinion?
I think they did the right thing by bringing them home as soon as they possibly could when they had the power to make those decisions. And it's just a huge celebration. Watching the broadcast, it brought back a lot of memories. Very short 6 months ago was when we were in space. And to see the vehicle and the beautiful imagery that SpaceX provided on the webcast was just phenomenal. And to top it all off, they got dolphins, swimming around the capsule in the water. We didn't have dolphins, not that I can recall, because our splashdown was at night. But it's just a huge celebration, and we should honor Butch and Sonny for their accomplishments.
Yeah, I mean, they're veteran astronauts, aren't they? Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams. And I don't know if you know either of them. Perhaps you do. Perhaps you've met them and had some interactions with them. President Trump sort of did a bit of speculating on the dynamic between the two of them. Wonder whether you heard that speculation and what you made of it.
I'm not sure what speculation you're referring to. If you can provide a little more color, maybe I can.
Well, there was a bit of a suggestion that perhaps, they might have had a romantic connection of some sort, being stranded on a spaceship for 9 months, out in space for 9 months. I mean, what do you make of that kind of speculation?
Oh, that sounds like a speculation to me. I mean, they're the utmost professionals. I've only been acquainted to them. It's a tight community, the astronauts, and they have an annual reunion. And they're nothing but the utmost professionals as far as my interaction is concerned.
Okay, that wasn't my speculation, just to be clear. That was the president who suggested that perhaps there'd been a little bit of a romantic interlude. Just lastly, I mean, I want to ask you about your own experience in space. And, it's not often that we get to speak to someone who's experienced zero gravity. Kid, what did you do? What did you first do when you got into that state of zero gravity? What was the first thing you wanted to try out? And what did you find perhaps personally most surprising about floating around and being zero gravity yourself?
Well, I flew fighter jets, F-16s for 20 years. And so I'm used to that adrenaline, but this was like nothing I've ever experienced. I mean, it's 1.7 million pounds of thrust. That's the equivalent of 70 F-16s, the aircraft that I flew. And, it's just a pretty violent ride to get to space. But once the separation happens between the first booster, the second booster, you're in orbit. And you're floating. It's just this overwhelming sensation of sensory overload, especially when you get to see the planet, because it's just something we're just not used to seeing. You know, the light is filtered through the atmosphere when we look up from the planet. Looking down, it's just this constant evolving, because you're traveling 17,500 miles an hour, and you're seeing sunrises and sunsets every 90 minutes, every hour and a half. So it's just this beautiful, beautiful view. And the microgravity, it's, you know, you're constantly overcorrecting. So you want to move around the capsule and you just start bouncing off walls because you're overcompensating. So it's almost like this meditative state you got to get into to be able to perfect that whole floating in space. But I wish more people could experience it, and I know that's the direction we're heading with the space economy and all these companies that are participating in this newest chapter of the final frontier. It's truly exciting, and I was just excited to be a part of it.
Major Tom to Kid Petite. I mean, what you just said there sounded a lot like the lyrics of a very famous song.
Use that one, haven't you?
There was a lot of what you said that sounded like the lyrics to a very much loved David Bowie track. Just lastly, sorry, we've got 30 more seconds left of this interview, but I mean, what did you try out what was the first thing you tried when you were experiencing that sort of sensation of having zero gravity around you?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate not to experience the whole space adaptation, the motion sickness. So I just started doing the tumbles, you know, spinning around, and because the capsule is rotating as well. So you look outside, you see the horizon. All right, that makes sense. A couple minutes go by and it's completely opposite. So you're trying to get used to this, you know, top and bottom, and it can be very disorienting, but I was just spinning away.
It sounds like a lot of fun. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Scott Kid Petite, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for Global News today. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hi Scott, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. So we're here at the Festival of Golf. As you can hear, it's all lively in the background. The Live season opener in Riyadh. What are your expectations for this weekend?
Well, first starts with fun and probably ends with families. And so having our first round last night, which was so exciting. It is my first Live event. And just to walk the course and see people smiling, you might hear the music in the background. We have music playing, we have DJs in our neon forest. And we have a fan zone that's to the likes I've never seen before. And the Backstreet Boys are playing tonight. So, I mean, when are you going to come to a golf tournament? See the greatest stars in the world. You got DJ, you got Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, Waco Neiman. I mean, it is a who's who of golf and pretty fun.
There's something for everyone, as you said, at the Backstreet Boys. I know a lot of the non-golf fans who are here are looking forward to that as well. There's also another first here. The tournament is being played under lights. What was the inspiration for that?
Well, you know, we have an incredible leader in His Excellency, Yasser Arafat, and he thought, hey, what an incredible opportunity to play at night. It'd be the first time it's ever been done before. We're in Riyadh, which is wonderful for television back in the US. You might know we have a new deal with Fox, so it puts the broadcast times in the right zone. It gives the players kind of an opportunity to test and try something new. And we have stars in this league that want to do something different. And I think it gives us an opportunity to showcase innovation, do something new and fun, and hit some broadcast windows in the US that are helpful.
Of course, absolutely, and we'll get to that point on Fox in a moment. So here it is, it's growing as a golf hub. What is the main driver behind that? Obviously, Liv is hugely involved in this. Where do you see the game growing over the next 5 years?
Well, there are so many incredible golf projects in the kingdom. I mean, you have Dariyah Gate, the project Greg Norman designed. You have what's happening in Qadiyah with those two beautiful courses down there. And it was just with a gentleman from Neom, which seems like that's going to be incredible too. So first off, it starts with the quality of golf courses. You clearly have commitment in this market. They continue to showcase, as we have here, a spectacular golf course and continuing the fandom to build. And I think that momentum is really going to help us for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. What are your favorite aspects of the Liv model? Obviously, like we've got the music here behind, the team aspect. Why do you think that is growing at such a fast rate in comparison with the PGA? Average age of the fans in the PGA is in the 60s. The average age of Liv fans is now in the 30s. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite aspect is the team aspect. I was with Sergio Garcia yesterday having lunch, and he was talking about how passionate he was about helping his guys, Luis and Puig and Abraham, kind of emerge and develop. I mean, and that to me is the specialness of this model. You have the greats of the game with an opportunity to kind of carry forward this next generation and help them emerge, not only as professionals and elite golfers, but also as human beings. And I think that's what brings me the most joy.
And kind of speaking about the human being aspect, I was lucky enough to walk the course behind Bryson DeChambeau last night, at Cameron Smith, at Dustin Johnson. These guys are just incredible.
You can't believe how athletic they are, right?
Yeah.
Like Bryson's drives, DJ's raw athleticism, and Cam's short game, you actually got to see it all. Like that is the best of the best on display.
Yes, and that is why, so like in terms of viewership, obviously you're competing against the PGA. As you mentioned earlier, you've just signed the deal with Fox as well as ITV in the UK.
It's a wonderful
You're
deal.
really starting to compete now for viewership with the PGA. This must be very exciting.
Yeah, I prefer like kind of co-opetition. I mean, I think all of us in the golf ecosystem, a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't think we're getting anywhere near scratching the surface in terms of the opportunity we have to drive more fans, golfers and non-golfers alike, into this golf family. Our household viewership opportunity in the 100 countries where we're broadcast is almost 800 million homes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so we have such opportunity ahead and such good momentum so far. And I'm rooting for the PGA Tour to do really well. I'm rooting for the DP Tour to do really well. And Liv is what I'm really passionate about.
And you yourself have had an incredible career, obviously, in the States. You've managed some of the biggest sports franchises in the world. What fundamentals from managing those are you going to bring into Liv to help further the game for Liv?
Well, the fundamentals are very similar. You know, if you look at the business model here, it's TV. And so we've made some good progress as of late. We have a ways to go, but incredible progress with Fox and ITV, among others around the world. Our sponsorship base, if you don't have to look too far, then over my right shoulder to see Madden come in as one of the top. It's one of the 6 largest mining company in the world with a world-class CEO. Riyadh Air, Roshan, and our good friends in Bahrain. So we have a great sponsorship base, and that's going to have to continue to grow around the world. But we've had such incredible support from the region here, which has been great. And then, you know, look, we need more people coming. We need more people watching, reading, wearing our merchandise. Get this vest at a store near you, and experiencing this incredible hospitality. So I would just encourage you to give it a try. If you have a chance to come out and see a Liv event, it is probably like no event you've ever been to in your life. It is fun, it's engaging, it's family friendly, and you get to see more stars than you see in any constellation in the sky.
Agreed about that. It was incredible last night. So you have come in to live at somewhat of an interesting time. Obviously, there's a lot of talk of allegiances with the PGA as well as the DP World Tour. Are you the man to achieve that goal? Is that something you want?
This is not, it never has been, never will be, it never could be about any one person. This is led by our incredible chairman. We have an incredible staff, and we have a golf industry that, as they say, inshallah, is actually pulling together and wanting to do what's best for the game of golf, to grow the game of golf, to come together and to make sure that everywhere around the world, golf fans are satisfied with what they're getting in terms of coverage and access to events.
President Donald Trump has recently met with the PGA Commissioner as well as Adam Scott, who also works for the PGA, to discuss a potential merger. There has been a lot of talk about this. Donald Trump has said on his campaign trail that in 15 minutes and one phone call, he could get a deal done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that if the leader of the free world is spending his time on golf, I am very happy. This game matters. It's one of the great life teachers in the world. It gives values that this world needs more of right now. It brings us together with connectivity. It gets us outside. It gets our phones in our pockets. It teaches us integrity and resilience and consistency, all things we all need to be successful in this world. And if there's commitment for all sides to bring the game together, which is good for the game of golf, I couldn't be happier.
Have you spoken with Trump?
I have not.
Okay.
But we are playing at his golf course in Miami in a few weeks. So you know.
And he is a fantastic golfer, obviously, with kind of break 50 with Bryson, who's obviously doing huge numbers online. That's been incredible to watch. Yeah. Another point, the US Championship announced on Wednesday that it will accept players from LIV. This is a huge coup, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's a coup. The RNA announced this similarly today. So for the Open Championship, we'll see the same in Northern Ireland this year. So very exciting. For us, is, you know, when you look at, when you consider the majors, the biggest stage in the world for the biggest stars in the world, and that's obviously the Masters at Augusta and the PGA of America, PGA Championships, and then the US Open and the Open Championships. They want the best stars in the world, and we have quite a few of them. And so I think when there's an opportunity to put those two things together, good things will happen. And we're really pleased and grateful and appreciative of this, you know, the olive branch and the step forward. We've got great leaderships in the organizations that matter, and we're thrilled to be a part of it.
I'll just end on quickly. Do you have a favorite golfer who plays elsewhere that you would like to see in LIV?
No. I have one favorite golfer. That's my father-in-law. I have to love him for something.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to seeing him on the course soon.
Okay, good. You will soon.
Thanks so much, Scott. A pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Al Arabiya News. I'm your host, Michal Prendergast. I'm thrilled to say I'm joined by the star of Shark Tank USA and millionaire investor, Kevin O'Leary. So Kevin, the world has been shocked about the return of Donald Trump. Are you shocked?
No. The Democratic Party lost its way. They're no longer in touch with the electorate. There was a certain arrogance they had, and I think the problem started when Biden left the ticket, because in the democratic process, usually you have a convention, And so you start from scratch. And that process weeds out any weakness in candidates. If they have an inability to articulate their position, for example, or they're not able to debate their colleagues or whatever. But the other advantage of the convention, and there's been many very famous conventions back as far as the 40s, 50s, and 60s, is that the party realigns itself with a new message because it's trying to figure out what's the best candidate for the times. And they also get a tremendous amount of press, almost 5-6 weeks of press. That's not what happened here. What occurred was, I don't know if you want to call them the party elite, but the Pelosi's, the Schumers, the Obama,
the deep
even
state,
some movie stars, you know, they said, well, we're going to anoint Harris. And that was a mistake because Harris, well, a very fine person, I'm sure, has never won anything. And last time she tried this, she didn't get a single delegate. So in 2019 she failed, 2020 she failed again in 2024. The analogy I think that is best serving this thing is the Super Bowl of all political contests on earth is the American presidential election. There's no greater political event on earth. And if your quarterback gets injured, which is what Biden was, you don't put in a new quarterback that's never played a game or ever won one, ever. They got shellacked, and they've learned an important lesson. I looked at that map, the electoral map, while covering the election. It was turning redder than a lobster being boiled. I mean, he just took the nation. And I think they're doing a little soul searching now. But they had it coming to them. And as I like to say, Trump did them a huge favor. He actually helped that party. They don't know it yet, but they're going to have to take a spatula to it and scrape all of those candidates away and start from scratch with new leadership. They'll be a very competitive party. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party that never got a chance to compete. Now they will.
Yeah, and speaking of Donald Trump, I've heard you say every Democrat has to thank him for saving American entrepreneurship and the American economy.
Yeah, the concept, some of the ideas being proposed, specifically taxing unrealized gains, that's un-American. The idea of price controls, Soviet-style price controls, that's un-American. The focus on gender identity was not the #1 concern of people that can't even afford chicken on their kitchen table. So when you get that lost, the system corrects itself, and that's exactly what happened. That's the amazing thing about democracy. When you try and stretch it too far in any direction, boom, it self-corrects. Now, you happen to be in the way of the self-correction, you get decimated, and that's what happened to that party.
Yes, and the effect of social media has been really interesting. Obviously, Elon Musk has played a huge part. Obviously, he paid it $44 billion. Do you see that as a good investment in the future of free speech?
Well, as an investment, it wasn't a good investment because it's valued now at 11 to 12 billion. But that doesn't matter. What he did do is keep alive the concept of free speech, because in a democracy, you're always dealing with 2.5% lunatic fringe. The cost of freedom of speech is the lunatic fringe. The minute you try and shut down the lunatic fringe, you're moving away from the concept freedom of speech. Everybody has a voice. You may not like what they say, but because they're part of the narrative, that is the core and the DNA of democracy. And so many ideas get tested, some get thrown out. And when you try and change that, again, the system self-corrects, and that's what happened here. So it's a very divided country now. We are going to have a new president with a full mandate. I mean, it looks like he's going to win the Senate and the House and the presidency. You can get a lot done for the first 2 years when you control everything. And so that's what's going to happen.
And obviously Trump in his first 4 years, it might have been called a little inexperienced. I think this time he won't mess around.
Well, he's actually signaled the market that he intends to hire seasoned veterans, AAA players, that don't have a mandate to go in the White House and write a book 6 weeks later after they're fired. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want a rotating door anymore. He wants A players, and he's grooming his He's got some very interesting people working on the inside to find the right people for every single position in cabinet. And I think it's going to be a fantastic government because it's going to focus on what the people want. They want security at the border. They've already said that. They want a reduction in inflation. The way you do that is you reduce energy costs. They want to strip away all the regulatory environment that the Biden administration put on. $1 trillion worth of burdensome regulation. He will tear that off like a Band-Aid, rip it right off, and the economy, as you can see, indexed by the market, the buoyancy that happened as soon as they figured out that he was going to be president, was pretty happy with that outcome. This is good for business. And when the economy is buoyant and people are getting employed, it's good for everybody. So, you know, the Democrats are licking their wounds, but in 6 weeks, everybody will forget about it, and we'll move on. It'll be a great thing for everybody. I think the U.S. is in a renaissance period. And I'm not really shilling for politicians. I never do that. I shill for policy. I care about policy. I care about entrepreneurship. I care about investing. I care about the American dream. I'm an ambassador for it. I want that to work because my family, you know, is American and they're working in the U.S. I want the best we can get for that country every day. And this is how you do it.
And speaking in terms of efficiency, Elon Musk has famously, he sacked or he got rid of 85% of Twitter, and it's still running pretty flawlessly. There's been a lot of speculation that he might get the Secretary of State for Government Efficiency. Would you like to see that? What could someone like Elon Musk do in terms of saving tax dollars?
I don't think he'll take an actual specific role in cabinet. I think what he will do is be a consultant for the American people, identify inefficiencies, and get the whacking stick out. I love that idea. I love the idea that we've never really scraped the fat out of the federal government, and it's big, porky, fat, dripping with opportunity to cut. But the only way you can do that is you need a mandate from the top dog, the president, because no agency wants to be downsized. You walk in saying, I want to fire a third of you. They're not going to help you. But he'll identify opportunity. I call it release the hounds, because what taxpayer, regardless of what your politics are, red or blue or independent, who wouldn't want to save money by just chopping out all the waste in the federal government? And I think if there's one man that has the ability to do that, proven executional skills, it's Elon Musk. So I really endorse this idea.
Well, I think it could be a great team, obviously, with Donald Trump and the art of the deal. To speak on the international scale, with tariffs, obviously it's a word that Trump has bandied around a lot. What does that mean for, I suppose, the average Joe in America and for the future of international trade? We're looking at China, we're looking at EV production. What do Trump's tariffs mean?
So tariffs were used as a form of rhetoric, weaponry during the election cycle. Harris called them sales tax, like a VAT tax that we have in Europe. That's not what they are. In fact, there's a bill cruising around the Hill right now in the U.S. It's a tariff reciprocal act. And what it says is any of our trading partners that impose tariffs will put a reciprocal, identical tariff. So if Germany puts 10% on cars, we'll put 10% on their cars coming to the U.S., that kind of thing. And of course, you know, there's a new act, the new NAFTA 2.0, if you want to call it that governs Canada, the United States, and Mexico, big trading partners. The one entity that I think you're going to see a lot more pressure on is China. China doesn't abide by the rules of the WTO. They joined in 1999 with all kinds of promises to play by the rules. They never did. So I'm an advocate for using tariffs to squeeze their heads like teenage pimples. And the way I make that is, point that out, is to say, look, the only way a supreme leader stays in power perpetually is everybody has bread and butter. You have to have a job, otherwise you ride against the supreme leader. And that's just the way it is in a communist dictatorship. So the way you squeeze the supreme leader's head is you say, look, let's pick a sector. I'm just going to use an example. Yoga mats. Let's say the U.S. orders 1 million yoga mats a week from China. You put a 400% tariff on it. And all the people making yoga mats in China lose their jobs. And they don't have any bread and butter anymore. And the supreme leader goes, oh my goodness, I don't have any jobs for these yoga mat makers. And then you say, well, where else can we inflict some damage? Let's do it in this sector. put on 400% tariff there, squeezing that teenage pimple till it pops. Then he gets on an airplane and flies to Washington saying, just kidding, just kidding. I want to work out and be part of the, Reciprocal Tariff Act, because China only understands the stick. They don't understand anything else.
It's a game of chicken.
Well, Trump scares his adversaries because he's unpredictable. He's just very unpredictable. When you know what your adversary is going to do all the time and they signal it to you beforehand, you're not scared of him anymore. They're scared shitless of Trump. And that's, excuse my French, but that's basically how it works. That's why you're seeing all these guys saying, oh, we want to have peace now. No, we want to stop. Because he's very unpredictable. So in the case of China, squeezing the supreme leader to the table is a good thing. So I would like to go to 400% tariffs, because I do business in China. They don't play by the rules.
And how about on EVs? Because obviously, even a 20% or even a 30% tariff on EVs, I believe in the EU, they're trying to flood the market. Obviously, Germany's not happened. We've seen Volkswagen cut 1,000 jobs in 2 months ago.
The point is, tariffs are temporary. They're a negotiating tactic. But if you're going to put them on, don't screw around. Go to 400%. Make it impossible for them to sell any widgets anywhere. So if you put 400% on an EV, no one's going to buy it. Only the Chinese can buy it. So all the people making the EVs, no bread, no butter. That's how you do it. Now, if I was the minister of Chinese head squeezing, that's how I would do it. And believe me, they will be at the table so fast because they cannot afford to have unemployment in that economy. And it's showing some cracks there. So you want to hit them while they're down and bring them to the table. They cheat on IP, they steal, you can't use their courts. A good example that people should focus on is Twitter, or not Twitter, but TikTok. TikTok has been deemed Chinese spyware by the American Congress. That's a bipartisan bill. By midnight on Jan 19th in the US, the servers are going to get turned off.
I've heard you say as well that you would like to buy it via a consortium. Do you want to buy Twitter?
Yeah,
TikTok?
I would definitely buy TikTok. I would buy it because it's a great, it depends what I get with it. If I don't get the algorithm, all I'm getting is a mailing list, so I'd pay a lot less for that. But we'll see how this goes, because remember, they did this in India. After 4 years, they had 200 million users on it, and the supreme leader would not, play by the rules with the Indian government, and they said, we'll just turn it off. And everybody was squeamish for a week, and then they forgot about it. They just drifted onto other social media platforms. So again, squeezing the supreme leader's head there is good. And it is spyware. I would never put that on a phone that I have sensitive data on. It's Chinese spyware. Everybody knows that. That's why it's shut down. They just shut it down in Canada. I mean, they're going to shut it down everywhere. But this is the arrogance of the supreme leader. He doesn't care. So you've got to squeeze his head. He will appreciate the head squeezing. He will thank you for it.
And is it the same, obviously, with the likes of Vladimir Putin and the war between Israel and Hamas? War is not good for business. Do you think Trump is going to have a large enough impact? He said famously, I will stop the wars within the first day of office. Do you think that's true?
Putin understands force. Not a very nice guy. He's killed a lot of people. But 25,000 young Russians a month lose their lives. He's buying their services now. There's no more patriots left. You get coffin money, your family gets a house, but you go die or get blown up. That's pretty brutal. So I would think giving him a call and saying, look, I've been thinking about this war. I don't like it. I don't want to pay for the Ukrainian costs, and I want it to stop. Come to the table, or I'll do something that would really surprise you, which is probably what people worry about with Trump, because we saw how he ended the Syrian conflict by just saying, I'm going to kill this guy. And he did. And I think that kind of erratic nature is what these adversaries worry about. Now, a lot of NATO players don't like to hear this, but I think war's horrible. I think all these people and children losing their lives is horrible. It's just, somebody has to stop this.
Exactly, and on a human level, but as well as
obviously
markets. So it affects the bread and butter as well. So you're taking food off of people's tables, affecting jobs as well as the human suffering. It's bad all around.
It is. So I think people are willing to try a different way. Now, whether Trump's successful or not, we'll see. But this carnage of death of young children, I can't watch it anymore. No one can.
Of course.
It's got to stop.
Then, moving on to cryptocurrency, we've seen markets as well as the price of Bitcoin increase. It broke $72,000, I believe, in the past few days. Do you believe under Trump, what is the height that you think it can get to under a Trump presidency?
So Trump has signaled, and the market knows this, that he is in favor of digital payment system, which includes Bitcoin, which is an asset class. I'm not saying that's a digital payment system, but it's no different than gold. I mean, you can own some gold, you can own some Bitcoin. I own both. What the problem is, we don't have institutional support for it yet because it's not regulated in the U.S. The way other commodities are. So the rumor on the street is that the CFTC, which regulates commodities, is going to get the mandate for crypto, and they're looking for someone to run it. And they'll probably take a lot of that away from Gensler at the SEC, who's been litigating this sector, and successfully, I might add. He's, all the crypto cowboys, like Binance, CZ, he's a felon now. You know what happened to Sam Bankman-Fried. So people that took on Gensler all lost, and this is probably a good thing, so we move into a phase now where it's going to be regulated. There's a lot of optimism about it. Here in Abu Dhabi, we have the M2 exchange, which is a very interesting idea because it's completely compliant with its regulator. I see a lot of upside coming in crypto.
And a figure, just briefly, do you think, what's the limit? Do you think it can reach 200K under a Trump presidency?
I think we'll all see 100,000 shortly. I feel everybody should have 5% weighting in gold in their portfolio. Nothing wrong with 5% weighting in Bitcoin. I mean, why not? I mean, unless you really think, and you don't have to do this, I'm just saying alternative asset classes in times of uncertainty and inflation are good. I mean, I own gold and I've had it my whole life. I was given a locket from my Irish father when I was 11 years old that had a gold coin in it. That's when I fell in love with it. I've had that ever since. And I own bullion, I own ETFs. I mean, gold is gold. The Romans loved it, I love it. Bitcoin is the new, it's not as old as gold, but it's performed very well for me.
Yeah, and just lastly, speaking on gold, obviously to have Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful in the studio, it would be a shame if I didn't ask about watches. You are, I would say, the most famous watch collector in the world now, doing millions of views on YouTube every month with the likes of Teddy Baldassar. He has just opened his new watch shop. I want to ask you, would you ever think of entering the watch strap business? The red bands are... They're synonymous with you.
It's a great question, but what I've learned about watch collecting and getting access, I mean, the thing that in my journey into horology is, in order to get watchmakers that are really unique, who make only a few pieces a year, you need to be known as a collector. And what does that mean? It means that you support the art, it's no different than contemporary art, and you don't flip them. So flipping a watch, when you get a reputation for buying it at the entry price from the watchmaker and then turning around and selling it for 4 times that the next week, you're not a collector, you're just a flipper. And the watch community is very small. It's in terms of the makers, there's probably 25 makers of consequence worldwide. The word gets out overnight that you're not a real collector. And so it takes a long time to earn the trust of an F.P. Journe or a Simon Britt or any of these makers. And I'm known I've never sold a watch. And so I have a very vast collection, and I'm a dial guy, as you know. So I'm always looking for the new dial. I'm wearing a Moser, a unique dial here. And of course, this is a classic Daytona. I thought, this is New York time, this is Abu Dhabi time. And so I support. The thing about getting into the business of retailing watches or retailing bands is all of a sudden...
I'd buy it, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I'm
100%.
You're no
I'll pay a
longer
pretty penny for an O'Leary band.
But I'm very fortunate. Every watch company knows I won't wear it unless it has a red band. So they don't even offer me watches that they can't put a red band on. I would never buy them. So my whole thing's red band because it looks fantastic. Great with gold, great with platinum. I mean, this looks gorgeous. works with my red.
Of course.
I just
Of course.
wonder
It's
if
like on Shark Tank. It's...
Yeah, the whole thing is, you know, it's just over the years, it's become one of my things. But each maker, watches are really a beautiful thing because they mark a period in your life. Every time I do a big deal, I buy a new watch, and I associate that deal with that watch. And you know, my daughters try and steal them, my wife, my son. Nobody gets to touch my watches. Like, that's it. That's the one thing that I've got. They're in vaults all around the world, you know, and I just love it. I just have so much fun. And the reason I like it is the community of watch collectors that I know all around the world are very eclectic. Surgeons, artists, financiers, royalty, you name it. And
journalists?
Yes, journalists. We share the passion of watches, and I think it enriches my life.
Great. Kevin O'Leary, a millionaire investor, host of the Smash Hit show at Shark Tank. Thank you so much for your time.
You got it. Thank you.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs,